5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome to the Brisbane City Council meeting of April 6th, 2023. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 7:34 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk, roll call, or do we need a report out from closed session first?
Yes.
Yes, Madam Mayor, there was one item in closed session, discussion of the sequel litigation status against high-speed rail by the city. The city attorney was given direction from the council. That's all that we need to report out at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to roll call.
Madam Mayor, we have no council member requests for item A. In terms of roll call, Councilmember Cunningham. Here. Councilmember Lentz. Councilmember Mackin. Here. Councilmember O'Connell.
Here.
And Mayor Davis.
Here. We'll now move on to adoption of the agenda. Do I have a first and a second to adopt the agenda as it stands?
So moved.
Second. Madam Mayor, I would like to remove item B from consent to be brought back at another meeting for some revisions.
Okay. Would you maybe make a new motion then?
Okay, I would make a motion.
Do we need that? Yeah, it's because she's bringing it back on a different meeting.
But wouldn't we do that when we go to consent?
Well, I think it's because she's bringing it back on a different meeting that we would need to amend the agenda. Is that correct?
When the consent item comes up, yes,
Okay.
We just do it on consent? Okay. So I'll have roll call vote on that then.
Yes. We got first from O'Connell and second from Cunningham. Roll call vote. Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
And Mayor Davis.
Aye. We'll now move on to oral communications number 1. This is for items that are not on the agenda. The first slip I have is Michael Barnes, and the time is 3 minutes. Yes. Okay.
Evening, Mayor, Councilmembers, my name is Mike Barnes. Prior to set the Brisbane Public Arts Initiative is among his biggest failures. Kevin was the originator and main driver of Brisbane's Art and Public Places program, known as Municipal Code Chapter 1585. After the failures of the public art process at Sierra Point, the skate park, and the library, the City Council met on June 17th, 2021. At this meeting, the City Council changed the public art implementation guidelines that were intended to fix the failures of public art program. The guideline changes appear to have been made in violation of Muni Code Section 1585-030, definitions, items C and E. During the discussion, City Council members Karen Cunningham, Cliff Lentz, and Madison Davis recommended hiring a public arts professional to guide the city's process. Madison cited Beth Grossman's opinion that this would be a wise decision, with Madison adding that it's important to have someone on board that can help us craft an RFP in the right way. Since 2 new Public Arts Committee women have yet to attend a meeting, I suggest you take this opportunity to pause the Public Arts Committee activities until 3 tasks have been completed. 1, the change process of the 2021 Public Arts Implementation Guidelines has been reviewed for conformance with the municipal code, or the guidelines are reverted to their original version. 2, a professional arts administrator has been hired permanently, temporarily, or on demand to guide the public art process. And 3, the Public Art Committee membership be changed to reflect best practices, eliminating City Council members from the Public Art Committee. It is widely recognized that having council members on arts committees is not a best practice, and no other city in San Mateo County has council members as part of their standing arts committees. We have seen firsthand in Brisbane how council members, with support of the city staff that serve them, have compromised the public art process. Please ask the Park and Rec Commission to revise the public art implementation guidelines to establish a public art committee that is composed of visual arts professionals and practitioners and remove elected officials in concordance with best practices. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have anyone else wishing to speak on items not on the agenda? City Clerk, is there anyone virtually that would like to speak on items not on the agenda?
Madam Mayor, I see no hands raised at this time.
Okay, so now we will move to consent calendar, and I understand there's a request from Councilmember Mackin to remove item D for some revisions and brought back at a future meeting. So if the rest of the council is amenable to that, do I have a motion to adopt or approve items C through K?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham,
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz,
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin,
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell,
Aye.
and Mayor Davis.
Hi. Okay. Now we are moving on to awards and presentations. Item L, administering the oath of office for newly appointed city committee members. The city clerk will administer the oath of office for the newly appointed committee members. For Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accountability Committee, we have Miyoko Nida, and Anna Dennis, and Ashley Bedelli. So you want to go ahead and do that now? Or do you want to do just, okay, so with public art? Okay, and then for Public Art Committee, we have Camille Salmon, Diane Glasman, and Danielle Kalstead. So if you could approach, and the city clerk will administer your oath of office. He's gonna go ahead and-
I will now administer the oath or affirmation of allegiance for public officers and employees. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California. That I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter. Congratulations. Did you get a good
I can take
photo?
a good photo if you want.
Okay, group photo, please. Congratulations.
Right here.
Ooh, professional.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you so much for your willingness to serve the city of Brisbane, and we look forward to all of the great work that we know each of you will do. We appreciate the time that you are giving to your respective committees. So now we will move on to the public hearing. Item M, consider adoption of a resolution for water and sewer rate increase. Council will consider a resolution increasing the charges for water and sewer services and setting the discount rate for the city's low-income rate assistance plan at 25% for all services. We've had a number of comments about holding this discussion during spring break and right before a major holiday. So, provided that the rest of the council is in agreement, I'd love for us to entertain possibly continuing the public hearing to the following meeting on April 20th. So the public has an ample time to express their concerns. You're more than welcome to express them this evening, and then possibly again at that later date, should the rest of the council agree to do that. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Carolina Ewan, Finance Director, who will start us off.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'll begin with a short intro, turn over to Catherine Seng from our rate study consultants, Lahovich and Sang, who will follow up with a slide presentation. So I wanted to walk us down before we get started, walk us down a brief history to look over the steps taken leading us to tonight's public hearing. So the purpose of tonight's public hearing is to discuss proposed changes to the city's water and sewer rates that will ensure the rates reflect the full cost of providing clean water and effective wastewater disposal to the various users while encouraging conservation of our resources. The reason for the change: to address the annual operating losses we've seen over the past several years and expected in the future if no changes are made. Also, to implement a rate structure that better responds to fixed costs. It's simplified and also in compliance with Prop 218, which spreads the fixed costs across the users, ensuring that not one group is subsidizing the use of another. So for some background, the water and sewer services are provided through the city's utility enterprise fund. This is different from a general fund. The general fund is sourced through sales taxes, property taxes, or other taxes voted by the voters, or service fees, set by council to cover related costs. However, on the flip side, an enterprise fund is required to be self-funding. It charges fees to cover its own costs, which includes operational system maintenance and infrastructure improvements or replacements. A utility enterprise fund should be able to operate at least at a break-even position, or even if possible at a net positive. So looking at our bills that we issue every other month to this residents of Brisbane, there are several line items on the bill. So first, there are the several charges that will be discussed tonight. First are the water service charges, which are the fixed charge just to have a meter connected to the system and for the city to ensure that the user has enough treated water available to provide full capacity for that meter. Then there's a usage charge, which is based on the number of units used during the 2-month billing period. The sewer charge, we have a fixed and a variable component. These are set every year based off of average usage during the winter. And then it's set based off of the usage that you have in October through January, and then we set it in April. Commercial customers, however, they are charged based off of the actual water that they use during that given period. So residential customers and commercial customers are charged differently for sewer usage, sorry. The capital project charge, this is to pay for capital projects, and the rate is based on the amount of water that is used between April and June. This charge is not being discussed tonight for an increase because the rates were set separately because it's looking to cover specific costs. Same with the drought contingency fund charge that you see on the bill. This was enacted to create a reserve fund to cover the loss of revenue that we saw during drought years. And it's setting us up so that our users can continue to conserve water, but allow the system to be able to pay and not see the hurt too badly of decreased revenues when we see the users conserve water. Again, this is not part of tonight's proposed rate changes. So back to history. Back in August 2001, the City Council discussed Ordinance number 458, which set the process of determining future water and sewer rate increases. This ordinance also recommended that all costs from San Francisco, where we purchase our water and who offers their sewer treatment, that those costs be passed on to our customers. In 2000, the city hired a consultant to perform a rate study used for the ordinance, and the city has been working off of that rate study ever since. So for the last 20 years, over 20 years now, we've been using that same rate study, and the rates that were recommended were increased and put into effect back in 2012. So we haven't increased the water or sewer rates since then. However, the city is seeing costs to purchase water and treat sewage to maintain infrastructure. Those costs have increased over that same period, specifically over the past 3 to 5 years. So we'll see some slides showing the increases over the years and expected increases going forward. So in other ways that we didn't increase rates during that period, we tried to cover how to cover the costs in other methods. One, again, was the drought conservation charge. So back in 2012, or after 2012 rather, California and the San Francisco PUC implemented requirements to decrease water usage in response to the drought. So those requirements were passed on and recommended to our users in conservation. And which is a great thing, was that our customers actually complied and really made great efforts towards conserving water. However, it negatively impacted our water revenue because 70% of our revenue is currently set up at a variable structure. So it's dependent on the water usage. So as you decrease your water usage, the revenue goes down. And at the same time, the costs the costs fixed are about the same at 70%. So with decreasing revenue, but your fixed costs are staying the same, you are running that risk of you're no longer covering the costs just to maintain that service. So it's great for the conservation, but it can decrease to levels that are not going to cover your costs. Where other agencies tended to do during the drought was raise rates, because they also saw those decreases in revenue, but they attacked it by increasing the rates, where we determined that we didn't want to go that route and instead established the drought contingency charge in 2017. And we expect that the drought reserve will be fully funded by 2025 if the drought does not continue and we don't need to use it. Capital charges was another way that we attempted to minimize a spike or an increase in the water rates. What we did, how you could use the revenue, operating revenue, to cover in infrastructure repairs, replacements, and any improvements. However, again, you're going to see spikes if you're trying to treat one big time project in a given year. So what we decided to do, the city decided to do, was create the capital charge and came up with a plan that it would take every 5 years for a period of 20 years and establish a rate so that every 5 years we would issue bonds to fund a group of projects that would be identified every 5 years. And so the first charge that went into place was in 2015, and that was to cover a bond that we issued for the first round of improvements. And then in recently in 2022, we did another charge. We were delayed because of COVID. We didn't want to increase the charge during COVID, so we increased it, and that's also going to be phased over a 17-year period because it's now been shortened, no longer 20, but it's going to include to improve it. The improvements included will be an AMI system that will help customers track their water usage in real time, and some other infrastructure that we have on the sewer system. So over the past 2 years, utility fund has been operating at a net loss. There have been a decrease in water usage among our commercial accounts during COVID. We saw several of our largest 25 users reduced during this time, and this was on top of the water conservation. And at the same time, we had wastewater treatment increase by 60%. So that's just in the last few years. Since 2012, the cost of the city's water purchases increased 67%. And then the wastewater treatment increased by 142%. And I just want to point out that I apologize. My staff report had 242%. It's 142. So thank you for those who caught it. We should look for a prize. But so looking at 2012 through 2022 for water, the net revenue was 1 million in 2019, and it went down to 100,000 in 2022. So we see the decrease of the water net revenue. And then for sewer, there was a net loss in 2019 of 50,000, which grew to 1.2 million in 2022. So those are not trends we want to see. Unfortunately, with the current rates, that's what we're expecting going forward. So the city council and staff were aware of these decreasing revenues, but decided not to propose rates, primarily because of the pandemic. You know, the city wanted to make sure that our citizens had other things to deal with. And so increasing water rates was not something that wanted to take on at that time. Unfortunately, this resulted in a decrease in revenues further. And the city, because we are holding bonds within this enterprise fund, there are requirements that we have to have 1.125 times basically the annual debt service. You have to at least have the revenue, the net revenue to cover that. We haven't been able to do that because of these net operating losses. And unfortunately, just this late or earlier this year, we had a review late last year, and this year we were informed that the utility bond, the rating was lowered from a AA- to a single A, and that lowering in that rate makes it challenging for us now to go and seek more bonds to do the next round of improvements, which means that we'll have to self-fund through the capital charge. So we
This is
can't
like
do
the city's credit score, for example, for those who.
just the enterprise
the
fund.
public.
Yes, this is the credit score, correct. So it's a bond rating. But I do want to specify it's just the enterprise utility fund, not the governmental side. So thank you. We can no longer delay implementing the rate increases. So we've heard the increases are high, and the city is trying to do this rate increase over 5 years. But if we would have increased since 2012 over the last 10 years, the average customer using 10 units of water would have paid an additional $5,000 over this last decade. So by delaying that, now the cost to the user is going to be now going forward. So in essence, for the past 5 years, you haven't been charged $5,000 for a user of 10 units. So that's just an example. In April 2021, the city retained the firm of Lechowicz and Sang, or L&T, to review the city's operation water and sewer rates. So for the last 18 months, the City Council Infrastructure Subcommittee worked with L&T to restructure the rate tables and develop various scenarios of rate increases. The city's consultant proposed to increase the base charge for water service, moving the city away from the variable rate structure for water usage to a more fixed position so that revenues will not be as impacted by reduced water usage in the future. The consultants also made recommendations to simplify the rate tables. Suggested rate increases were presented at the City Council meeting held on December 5th, 2022. And then council selected the rate option that was under consideration at that meeting and directed staff to proceed with the requirements of Prop 218 in order for the council to consider adopting the rate increases. So what is Prop 218? What does that process entail? California Supreme Court determined that water and sewer charges are property related, hence subject to Proposition 218, the Right to Vote on Taxes Act, which was enacted in the 90s. As such, the city is required to notify property owners regarding any increases to such charges and to conduct a public hearing, which we are today, at least 45 days after written notification to allow time for customer and community input. So Proposition 218 requires each property owner be sent a notification letter to inform them of the rate increases, the proposed rate increases, details of the public hearing, so time and date, how to protest, whether in person, and instructions how to submit a written protest. So the city obtained property tax rolls from San Mateo County with a total number of 2,184 parcels. So the city mailed out letters at least 45 days prior to this evening, as required, to both property owners and also utility users, if different, such as tenants, as a courtesy, because we know they will also be impacted, especially if they're the ones paying the bill. So the letters were dated February 17th, and they were sent out for a total of 2,791 letters. The city determined that written letters with signatures would be considered as valid protests. And for a variety of reasons, including cybersecurity, the city decided not to accept electronic submissions and therefore provided instructions in the notification letter on the methods to protest that would be accepted and counted. Prop 218 does not require protest letters sent electronically be accepted, just that the protest process be outlined on the notification letters and followed. If more than 50% of the parcel numbers represented in protest the rate, who protest the rate increases, then the city will not be able to increase the rates, which will result in not ensuring the continued ability to provide clean drinking water and safe conveyance of wastewater to the treatment plant. If there is no majority protest, council may determine the amount of the increases and when the increases will be implemented. As of this evening, the city clerk had written protests represented by 12 parcels. There's also a discount component as part of tonight's proposal, which is for the low income rate assistance program, or what we call LIRA. Just as a matter of time, right now it's basically that each service, water service, sewer service, they all have different rates. And what we're attempting to do today is to make one flat rate of 25% to start to apply to the whole bill. Right now, the drought contingency and the capital charge are not included in the discount, but the proposal tonight would include every single line on the bill to be at least 25%. There will be a fiscal impact if you raise rates or if you don't. Fiscal impact, Catherine will share how the city will cover its costs through collected revenues and provide a few examples of how the changes will impact a variety of customers. And we're proposing to increase these rates starting in June, which won't be reflected until the August bill. So it's the next fiscal year, and they will not be due until October. So because we are on a bi-monthly basis, there is a delay in when we will actually start seeing the results of any increases. So our recommendation for tonight, for the council to adopt the resolution presented in your staff reports and approve the proposed rates, including those listed on attachment A, which represent an annual increase for the water fixed charge of 9% through 2027, an increase of 7% on the water usage rate through 2028, an annual increase for both sewer charges of 25% through 2028, and setting the discount rate for the city's LIRA plan, or low income rate assistance, to a fixed cost, or fixed rate rather, of 25%. Staff recommends the rate increases go into effect again June 15th. And as a measure of success, adopting the resolution would enable the city to cover our annual costs through revenues collected over 5 years and would allow the city to continue to provide clean, safe drinking water and effectively dispose of wastewater as economically and as possible while being financially sustainable. And as we have seen around the country, the impact of failing to maintain and manage key utility infrastructures can result in threats to public health and the environment. So thank you for your time. And now I'd like to turn it over to Catherine Singh.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and council members. I was here in December and to give a summary of our water and sewer rate study. Tonight is another summary, but I'll be concise because I know Carolina already went through a lot of this. Yes. Oh, I'll come closer. Okay.
I think you have to point it that way.
Oh, got it. Okay, so tonight we're discussing the 3 charges in the box: the water use charge, the water service charge, and the sewer charge on the bi-monthly utility bill. There's actually 5 charges, but today we are looking at the operating rates, specifically the operating water rates and the operating sewer rates. And these pay for operating expenses, which include staffing, utilities, water purchases, and sewer treatment, equipment, and fund reserves. So these are the rates that have not been increased since 2012. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, can you go? I'm sorry, just this. Slide to, okay. Okay. Got it. Got it. Okay. As Carolina had mentioned, the last rate study, the last water and sewer rate study was in 2001, and the actual last rate increase was in 2012. The current rate study, we began this in 2021, but the city delayed any increases due to the COVID pandemic. We also worked with the Infrastructure, Utilities, and Franchise Subcommittee to develop these recommendations. And our rate study covers the 5-year period beginning 2023-24 through fiscal year 2027-28. And these rate increases will be effective June 15th of each year, beginning this June through June 15, 2028. And these increases will be reflected on bills issued in late August with a due date in October. As Carolina mentioned, water and sewer funds are enterprise funds, which means that all their costs are recovered by user fees. So the people that use the system pay for it. And it's completely separate from the general fund. And these enterprise funds receives no tax revenue. So all costs need to be covered through these user fees. And the revenues may only be used for the purposes related to the enterprise. So water rates can only be used for water expenses, and sewer rates can only be used for sewer expenses. And per state law, these rates may not exceed the cost of providing service, and the city makes no profit on these enterprise funds. So Prop 218 is part of the California Constitution, and this governs how these charges, property-related charges, meaning water and sewer rates, are adopted. So rates must be based on the reasonable cost of service. They must be proportionally recovered costs based on how customers take that service. And revenues from these rates can only be used for intended purpose. And you can only set rates for a maximum of 5-year period. So after that 5-year period, the city must do another rate study if they want to increase rates. And the procedural requirements for these user fees are to conduct the rate study, mail a notice to property owners, and hold this public hearing a minimum 45 days after the notice is mailed. And then the rates cannot be adopted if more than 50% of the ratepayers submit written protests. So why are the sewer and water operational rates being increased? Well, they have not been increased in over 10 years. Since then, the cost for you to purchase water, so the city purchases all of its water from the SFPUC, the San Francisco Public Utilities Committee. The cost to purchase water since 2012 has increased 67%, and that is the water fund's largest expense, is to purchase water. On the sewer side, your cost for wastewater treatment, so the city is in charge of the collection system, but the city of San Francisco actually treats your wastewater. So that is also the sewer fund's largest expense is sewer treatment. It's over like 55% of your expenses. Since 2012, the cost to treat water has increased 142%. Additionally, since the COVID pandemic, water use has gone down because a lot of businesses had closed or business had slowed down. So resulting in the utility fund, which the utility fund is the combined water and sewer fund, is operating at a loss, which means expenses exceed revenues. Because you're operating at a loss, the utility fund is not meeting its debt service coverage, and therefore you can't go out and sell bonds, meaning the city cannot get financing to complete their needed capital projects. So we're going to start with the water utility. This is an overview of your system. As I mentioned, the city purchases all of its water from the SFPUC. So if the SFPUC raises its rate, the city has to pay. The water system, you have 4 pressure zones, includes 3 storage tanks and 2 booster tanks. And this is all interconnected with the Guadalupe Valley Municipal Improvement District system. In total, you have about 2,000 total customers. The majority of your customers are single-family residential customers. So for your water rates, there's 2 components to your water rates. The first component is that fixed charge. All customers, regardless if you use a drop of water, are charged a fixed charge, and this charge is based on your meter size. Currently, this fixed charge varies based on your customer class. And so your meter size is used as a proxy for the estimated demand that each customer can place on the water system. So if you have a smaller meter, which is the smallest is a 5/8 inch meter, compared to a 2-inch meter, you can get a lot more water through that 2-inch meter than from the 5/8 inch meter. And therefore, you're charged more based on your estimated demand. So the fixed charges are intended to recover your fixed expenses, which means these are the costs that the city maintains regardless if anyone uses water. So that's staffing, customer service, maintaining the system, repairing the system. And currently, the fixed charges generate 15% of your total operational rate revenue. The second component is the consumption charge, and that is based on your actual usage. So currently, these consumption charges vary based on your meter size and based on your customer class. And these consumption charges are intended to recover your expenses that vary based on the amount of water use, such as water purchases, utilities, and chemicals. And currently, the consumption charges generate about 85% of total water sales revenues. So these are your current bi-monthly water rates. You'll see the rates vary based on your customer class and your meter size. So your consumption charge is based on 100 cubic feet of water, and 100 cubic feet of water is equal to 748 gallons. And I have a slide later on that helps graphically explain how much water that is. So these are your proposed bi-monthly water rates. So we try to simplify the water rate structure. Since your last rate study, there have been many lawsuits and laws passed that basically say that we need to justify any rate structure. And so your current rate structure had all those different tiers. We have no cost justification for why we have those many tiers. I know that study was done in 2001 and the cost basis since then has changed dramatically. So we're proposing one single rate structure that all customers, regardless of your customer class, will be charged. And next slide. So here's our proposed water rate structures. For that fixed charge, we're proposing that all customer classes will be charged the same fixed charge. It'll still vary based on your meter size, meaning the larger meter sizes will pay more. Additionally, all customers will receive 1 unit of water, that's 748 gallons, with the fixed charges. So currently, only customers with that 5/8 inch meter receive that 1 unit of water. We're going to make this more equitable and provide that 1 unit of water for all customers. For the consumption charges, we're proposing to simplify the tiered rates into one tiered rate structure. So tier 1 is 1 to 2,000 cubic feet. And the average bi-monthly residential use is 1,000 cubic feet. So we're doubling your average use in that first tier. And tier 2 is all water use over 2,000 cubic feet. So this slide shows what 748 gallons is. So 100 cubic feet is equal to 748 gallons, which if you follow through, I estimate is equivalent to 5,665 bottles of water. So you're actually getting a lot of water within our proposed tiers. So this chart summarizes the projected expenses over the next 5 years, our rate study period. As you'll see, that blue color is the supplies and services, which includes water purchases. So that accounts for over 50% of your total operating expenses. And since 2012, the SFPUC's rate has increased from $2.69 to $4.50, and that is to help pay for their $4.8 billion project to upgrade the Hetch Hetchy project, the Hetch Hetchy water system. I think they're about a year or two from completion, so that's why the rates increased so much during those years. And as you'll see, that red line represents the current water sales revenues, which is estimated at $3 million a year. And you'll see without rate increases, the water fund will soon go into a deficit. Oh. Sorry. Okay, so during our rate study, we looked at different scenarios, different rate increase scenarios to determine what the best rate projection for the next 5 years should be. So we looked at one scenario where there was no rate increases, that's the purple line. We looked at scenario 2, which is 8% annual rate increases. That 8% reflects annual operating inflation. And as you'll see, that's the yellow line. And at this third scenario was the 9% annual rate increases. The red line represents the water fund reserve target, which is 25% of annual operating expenses. As you'll see, the green line is the only line that will continue to meet the city's water fund reserve target over the next 5 years. So this is a comparison of the bi-monthly water bill for a typical residential customer that has a 5/8" meter using 1,000 cubic feet every 2 months. So the current water portion of your bill, and this includes the fixed and consumption, is $82.85 for every 2 months. With the proposed rates in 2027-28, your water portion of your bill is projected to increase to $121.52. And here's a survey of just the water portion of your utility bill. This includes the fixed charges, the consumption charges, as well as the capital project charge and drought contingency charge. So we're comparing the city's current rate with its proposed June 15, 2023 rate with your surrounding neighbors. As you see, you'll still be on the lower end with that first rate increase. So this shows the cost to purchase 1 gallon of water. And I have looked at Safeway today. That's $1.29 for 1 gallon of water compared to the cost of 1 gallon of tap water. That's if you just go to your kitchen or bathroom, which is about 1 cent. And that's based on our proposed bill for June 15th for that average customer. So we just wanted to show you that the city's water is still a very good deal. Okay. Should I stop or just keep on for sewer?
Keep going.
Okay. So the city maintains the sewer collection, but contracts with the city of San Francisco for the actual sewer treatment and disposal. And the sewer system has 8,000 feet of pipelines. The wastewater flows by gravity or is pumped to the Valley of Drive lift station and then conveyed to the city of San Francisco's Southeast Water Quality Control Treatment Facility. So you have about 2,000 sewer customers, majority of are residential, and total annual sewer flow is about 173,100 cubic feet. So your sewer rates also have 2 components. There's that first flat charge, and all customers are charged the same flat charge regardless of your customer class. And that is the minimum charge for all customers. That currently generates about 39% of total sewer service charges. The second component is the variable charge. And that currently your variable charge is based on your water consumption because sewage isn't metered. So water consumption is used as a like a proxy for your actual use down the sewer. And currently, the variable charge has two-tiered rate structure, which is very uncommon. And so that commercial rate, basically, there's three commercial classes, and that's based on your customer strength. That includes standard, medium, high. So residential, standard, medium, and high, because we all have a two-tiered rate structure. And currently, it generates about 61% of total sewer service charges. So here are your current bi-monthly sewer rates. As you see that flat charge, everyone currently is paid at $6.87, but the tiered rate varies based on your customer class and strength. So here is the proposed bi-monthly sewer rates. We're still proposing that every one pays that same flat charge, but we're eliminating that tiered rate structure and just implementing a uniform variable charge that varies based on your customer class. So basically, we're eliminating that tiers because the tiers are typically used for water rates to encourage conservation, and they're really less relevant to sewer flow. So here is a projection of the sewer fund's operating expenses over the next 5 years. The green represents your supplies and services, and that's your treatment costs, which have increased about 142% since 2012. And that's because San Francisco is in the process of completing their $3 billion upgrade of their treatment plant. So current sewer service charge revenues is $2 million. As you'll see, that $2 million is insufficient to cover operating costs. So therefore, the sewer fund is already operating in a deficit. We also looked at various scenarios for the sewer fund. We looked at, a no rate increase. We looked at scenario 2, which is that operating 8% annual rate increase. And then we also looked at a 25% annual rate increase. And the 25% is the only one that will get the sewer fund out of deficit in the next 5 years. We still won't mean meeting debt service coverage, but at least we'll be out of deficit. No, I'm sorry. We still won't be meeting your reserve fund target. We will be meeting debt service coverage. I apologize. I need to clarify that. And here is your comparison of your bi-monthly sewer bill for a typical customer using 1,000 cubic feet for every 2 months. Your current bill is $106.67, and it's projected to increase to $340.33. And this is just the sewer portion. It does not include a water or the capital project charge. And here's a survey comparing your current bill with the proposed for June 15th with the surrounding agencies. And this chart does include those other charges of the capital project charge. So here is a proposed combined bi-monthly bill. So this graph includes all 5 charges that are included in your utility bill. So the blue are the water, the green's the sewer, the capital charge is in the yellow, and the little, the orange is the drought charge. And for the low income rate assistance program, so the discount is funded from the general fund because rate revenues cannot be used to subsidize the rates of another group. So the city can use any other source of revenue except for rate revenues to fund a general fund. Currently, as you'll see, the discount for each water or for each utility service varies. We're proposing just to simplify it and to start the discount off at 25%, but it is up to the city to determine how to set that discount. So it could be 25, it could be more, it could be less. It's also based on how much funding is available from the general fund. The next step, if rates are approved, the rates will be increased on June 15th of each year, beginning 2023 through 2027. The increase will be reflected on the bills issued in late August with a due date in October. And the city will review the utility fund's financial standing every year before implementing any rate increases. And I'll take any questions.
Can you go back to that slide? You went through it super fast, which it had different cities in the county.
Yeah, the sewer one or water?
It was the one most recently.
Okay, the sewer, yeah.
Because I know, do you have it? Yeah, back.
It's, I think, 28. Yes.
Yeah. Do you have this for water too?
Yes, that's.
I think we might have went through it fast, but I know that there was a member of the public who wanted to know how
17.
costs
Yeah.
compare. So I thought this was important just to leave up for a second. And then maybe in a few minutes did you say slide 17?
17 is the water.
So maybe you could go to slide 17, Ingrid, so we could also see that. And the difference in these is that Brisbane purchases our water from San Francisco, but I understand there are other cities in the county that purchase their water from other places. So like San Bruno, right, is on. Can you explain why there might be these differences?
Well, each system, I mean, everyone's system is different, but San Bruno, I believe, does purchase, if you're on the
Okay.
peninsula, I do believe you purchase water from the SFBC, so they are facing the same rate increases as Brisbane is. But each system is different. There's also, the other cities are larger, so economies of scale. But it's not really a fair apples to apples comparison because, and also Brisbane was able to hold off on increasing these operational rates because you had development impact fees from new development. Those are the fees that new development pay to connect to the system. And the city was growing, so you were able to use those impact fees to, delay rate increases. But now growth has slowed, and you can no longer rely on those impact fees. So each city's situation or financial standing varies based on because it's not fair to say it's an apples to apples comparison.
Pardon me, Madam Mayor. May I help answer that question for you?
Yes.
One of the advantages that San Bruno has is that they overlie a potable water aquifer. So they're able to pump water directly from the ground.
thought
So
they
their
had, like,
cost
well
of
water or
delivery,
something.
right? So it's well water. So their cost of delivery is just electricity to pump it up a couple hundred feet
Right.
and to treat it with chlorine. So that's why they have an advantage. They do supplement their supply. They're also a wholesale customer of SFPUC.
Okay. I don't have further questions at this time. I thought that was a very extensive staff report. Thank you for all the effort both of you put in. I had a lot of questions that you went over, but I'll turn it over to other members of the council. Colleen, would you like to start? Do you have any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. Could we go back to the slide with the sewer comparison, different cities, number 28, I think it is? There we go. Okay. And maybe Randy can comment on this. Some of these cities do their own sewer treatment. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay. So we're not just dealing with processing of sewage, we're also dealing with, as San Francisco redoing the entire system, we're receiving some of those costs.
Yes, basically anyone who contracts with this San Francisco for treatment is sharing in the costs of the upgrade. Yes.
Right. So some of the peninsula cities in the southern part of the county, as I understand it, there are several cities that have combined treatment facilities. So that saves them money. They're not paying someone else. They're just bearing their own cost, whereas we are paying another city and also incurring additional charges for infrastructure repair. So that in itself makes it, as you're saying, really hard to compare apples and oranges. They're different.
Yes.
But in general, Cliff and I were on the infrastructure subcommittee. This was really, really hard to contend with because it's hard for the public to understand some of this. And we sweated through lots and lots of comparisons on how to keep costs down, how to not make the costs increase too fast. And yet you talk about the targets, and I've heard some people over a couple weeks in looking at this, residents saying, well, why are you aiming towards a certain spot when you showed the graphs? Why are we aiming to that point? And are we just trying to build up a bunch of money in the bank? Because I heard people saying that. Could you please for our
No.
public, explain why we have these targets.
So when we looked at the rate scenarios, we actually had three objectives. The first was to meet debt service coverage, which is so that you could borrow bonds. And currently you're not meeting that debt service coverage. So you needed that 1.25 ratio. You need a certain amount of revenue above your annual debt service to meet that ratio. So we're not meeting that because you're in a deficit. So the first goal is to meet that debt service coverage. The second goal was to meet your reserve fund target, which your target is 25% of operating expenses, which is standard. It's nothing, it's just prudent financial policy to have a reserve fund because currently you're dipping into your reserves to cover your expenses. So that was our second goal. And the third goal was for total revenues to cover expenses. So those were our three objectives when we determined what the rate increase was. And it was just to make sure that the water and sewer utility funds were fiscally sound and able to cover your expenses. So those targets, yes, they increase, but that's because that reserve fund target is based on your annual operating expenses. So each year it does increase, based on if your operating expenses increase, then that reserve fund target increases. But it's 25%, and that's pretty standard for a reserve fund.
And so in terms of future increases from San Francisco PUC,
Mhm.
you've built in
Yes.
some factors to anticipate that that might also happen because we can only do this every 5 years
Yes.
by state law.
Yes.
So if we just dealt with the current situation, we'll be digging ourselves in a
Yes.
bigger hole. So we're trying to keep ourselves more on par with what
Yes.
we anticipate.
We anticipate over the next 5 years that the SFPUC rate will increase by 10%. So our overall inflation rate is 8%, but that's because of that 10%. For salaries, we estimated 4%. Everything else is 4%. Insurance was, I believe, 5%. But everything else, was 4 to 5%. But it's because of that 10% increase from the SFPUC, which is likely the overall inflation rate for the operating expenses is 8%. So that was that scenario too. We wanted to see if we could just cover our operating cost inflation with those rate increases, but they're insufficient because you're already running a deficit. So you really would always just be behind. You would just barely cover your costs each year.
Okay, and you also work with many different municipalities, and just an overall impression. Are other communities all through California dealing with the same problem with escalating water rates and sewer rates?
Well, yes, the city of Brisbane, because you contract out, you'll purchase all your water and you contract out your treatment, which those two are your largest costs. You have no control over those. And if you don't pay it, what can you do? So because you do purchase all your water and you do contract your treatment, it does seem that your rates, you're kind of at the mercy of, your treatment purveyor and your water purveyor. So, but everyone is facing the same problems. They have to do repairs and replacements. There's more stringent regulations. Conservation, revenues are down because people are using less water because of the drought. So all water, and sewer agencies and cities are facing the same issues as the city has. The city was fortunate in that in the past you did have development fees and other sources of revenues to supplement your rate revenues. Some other, cities weren't as fortunate and have had that increased rates every year.
And so then final thing, if you could also just maybe explain, emphasize, we're all told with drought, we need to conserve water. And Brisbane, by the way, is doing really well with conserving water. In regards to the San Mateo County, we're one of the shining examples of how to conserve. We're doing a good job. But the costs to operate the system, that's all the employees, that's treatment, that's the staff, the billing, all those operating costs stay the same, whether you use a little bit or a lot, and those costs have to be paid by all of
Yes.
these customers.
So when we looked at the rate structure, we saw that fixed component and the variable component. So ideally, your fixed charge would cover all your fixed costs. But if we did that, your flat rate would be, much higher than what it is currently. So realizing that, the city has decided, to put so the charges on that variable component. So it is based on water use. But your fixed costs, regardless if no one uses water one day, you still have those, staffing costs. You still have to run, your pipes. You still have a whole system to maintain. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember Cunningham, do you have any questions?
I do. It is and it's not related. So could you, just for the edification of all of us and the public, explain how the treatment of wastewater and how the treatment of drinking water has changed in the last 10 years? I believe a lot has changed and that has driven a lot of the costs. Is that
Can
for
I
you, Randy?
defer to Randy?
Sure, I'll be happy
Randy,
to take a
question?
swing. I'll be happy to take a swing at that as the engineer as opposed to the rate study consultant. Yeah, over the last 10 years, we've had just a never increasing amount of regulation on both the water and the wastewater treatment side. Water, as you know, a number of years back, we transitioned from chlorine to chloramine. And what happens on what seems to be a bi-yearly basis is that the US EPA, under their guidance for clean water and the Safe Drinking Water Act, come out and they add more and more contaminants to the list of things that we have to test for and that have to be treated for to make sure they're not in our system. The latest ones you've probably heard about, PFAS, the polyfluoroalkyl substances are on there. That's big. Plastics is starting to become a big thing. So that's on the water side. And on the wastewater side, there are typically 3 treatment trains in a wastewater treatment plant. There's a primary, a secondary, and tertiary. So primary is where you take out, for lack of a better expression, you take out the floaters and the sinkers, right? It's just like you take a big sieve and you move those things out of it. When you go into the secondary treatment, that's a biological treatment that you have to do. So it's microorganisms that are specifically grown to break down the organics that are in the remaining fluid there. And then the last treatment you have is typically it's a type of chlorination that you do so that you're trying to disinfect any remaining microorganisms that are in there. Many years ago when we started this, primary was all people did. And so we've gone to secondary, but while we haven't yet forced everyone to go to tertiary, we are still at the point where the requirements for the output parameters of the secondary treatment have increasingly been raised. So that's why we're starting to see a lot of increased costs with the SFPUC plant that we send our sewage to down at Hunters Point. And also, of course, people are starting to look at that. They're expanding it even more. They say, well, we've got this and we've got this fluid. Maybe we ought to take it beyond that third stage and make it available for use for recycled water. So all of those things and all of those plans as we move forward just continue to ratchet the costs up.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Catherine.
Is that it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Lentz?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, for just providing a very comprehensive overview of what what we're dealing with. We've all been hearing from our constituents about the increase in the rates, and of course, no one's happy. But having just really detailed information, and I really appreciate that exchange that you just had with Catherine in regards to why it's so important to have those reserves. And having that type of dialogue really kind of tells the story of, okay, we are really looking at this in a serious manner, and we don't want to provide a steep hardship for folks, but we also have to make sure that we run a responsible system and that we can pay our costs. So I want to go to that second page, and in 2000, so we had the study, right? And so we looked at the capital improvement plan, but then we didn't move forward with doing the capital rate charges until 2015. So I'm hoping maybe someone can provide a little bit of history on that and why that was, why it took so long.
Yeah, I guess I get the old person in the room tag for this one. So I was around when we did that, and it was not that provides any comfort today, but it was a much uglier process than what we're even going through now. We had very, very low rate base. We had not at that point in time put together a capital improvement program, nor had we really looked at what it was going to cost to do the operation. So we did all of that at that point in time. And we came forward with a report that I think our initial take was some like a 300 and some odd % increase, knowing obviously we weren't going to do that all at one time. So that got phased in over a number of years. I want to say 3 years, I believe. But it was really aimed primarily at the securing funds to upgrade the operations and to do some of the critical capital stuff. It also gave us the ability to go back to Washington, D.C. In those days, they were doing earmarks, and Senator or Congressman Lantos was very helpful. And we got a couple of different funding opportunities, especially on the sewer side. So that was kind of carried us through, I think, up through the Great Recession. And then when the Great Recession hit, obviously that kind of put the brakes on looking forward to do, too much in terms of rate increases or some of the capital piece of it. So the capital charges, at least, and maybe Catherine can speak to this, as I understand, it's a fairly unique thing that we've done, that we don't see that in a lot of communities or a lot of systems. So I think that.
I mean, actually, if it's not a separate charge, it's included typically like in the fixed charge.
In the
Yeah.
fixed charge,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
for the
a
city,
separate
yeah.
capital charge, I think, is somewhat unique. So that, and I think Carolina went through what we were trying to do is be able to do this over a phased period of time, which is basically 20, 25 years, doing 5-year increments, sell the tranches of bonds to do the capital in that period of time. And frankly, from Randy's operation, the amount of projects they can do in any one particular time, is limited, right? So you can't, even if you had 30 or 40 million dollars, you couldn't actually use it in one at a point in time. So I'm getting way beyond your question, but there was a lot of iterations over the years in terms of basically upgrading both the financial management of the system as well as the day-to-day staffing and oversight of the system, as well as the capital piece of it. And you just couldn't do everything at once. So things had to be evolved over time.
Okay, no, that's great getting that history. And it sounds like, by having that capital improvement plan, it allowed the city to go out and get grants from other agencies.
Yeah, I mean, we've just been going through some applications right now that Randy's been working on, and having that available and knowing what we want, what the priorities are, and the descriptions of the projects. He can speak to it better than I can, but that's absolutely critical to doing grant applications.
All right, and then I have another history question here. So, back in 2012, so that was the last time that we did the rate increase, and I was on the council. I think, Terry, you were on the council as well, right? And so kind of having a similar discussion, how do we help our folks, right? And while still making sure that we are responsible with the system. And so we looked at, these connection fees, right? And so, so it's mentioned a couple of times in the staff report and talking about the one-time revenue sources. So, I'm not expecting you to give us a number, but maybe when it comes back to the council on the 20th, I think it would be nice to know, like, well, how much did that raise, right? If we were able to postpone, it'd be interesting to know. And then, and then just, maybe Clay, you might be able to just kind of share, like, where did the majority of those connection fees come from?
Well, the connection fees come from any new development. So they're not restricted to any one particular class of user or location in town. But I think it's fair to say in the last 5 or so years, most of it has come from development at Sierra Point.
At Sierra Point. Okay. All right. Okay. And then that money that was collected through those connection fees, that's for development that has already occurred, nothing that's current or in.
Right. You pay a connection fee at the time you get a building permit.
By the time you get the building permit. Okay, great. Let's see.
you know, Carolina, you talked about the bonds, right? The rating, you know, going from the AA minus to the A. I mean, I don't know what that really means. I mean, I'm just assuming that, you know, if you have a lower rating, that means you potentially have to pay more, right? You get a higher interest rate, right? So then that costs the city. So that's not in our interest to be in that position. Okay. But, you know, if we move forward with what's being proposed, then you feel pretty confident that we'll get our rating back, or maybe even be better than the AA minus?
Over the 5-year period, when we get back to levels where we're meeting the compliance and our reserve requirements, then we would be in a better position for the rating and to get back to a preferred rating, which would save money, but also would potentially add more opportunity for us to even issue bonds, because the lower the rating, then you're talking about who you're attracting, right, for those bond issues.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And then I just have one more question for you. And so the LIRA program, and I know that we're proposing the 25%. It would be helpful to have some greater detail on that, in like showing some scenarios. If a family, you know, is earning this is what the difference would be. Just because it's hard for me to kind of understand, like, okay, there's this proposed 25%, but the current discounts, they just seem higher. So it just seems like maybe, you know, I mean, people who make less money, you know, send more of their paycheck for things like gas and, you know, or sales tax, right? And so just, you know, I was wanting to make sure that you know, that the discount that we do provide, and granted, you're right, Catherine, right? We can't get it through these rates. It has to come out of the general fund. It has to be kind of a donation, really,
Correct.
right, from the city. And so, but, you know, it would be nice to understand what our contribution is. And so that, I think it would be, by having that information, it gives us a better understanding of what is appropriate to give.
So a scenario of usage on what the current discount looks like for their total bill versus going forward.
Yeah, you
Okay.
know, like when you're looking at certain households and what the median averages, and whatever, like whatever qualifies here for that PGD rate. And then, yeah, if there's a way to kind of correlate that into what those additional costs would be for them.
Yeah, for us, it would be depending on, I mean, we could assume some usage levels. We'd have to, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, that's it.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Connell.
You know, having listened to all the presentations and the information from staff and the questions from council, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, I will go ahead and open the public hearing. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the council will consider continuing the public hearing until April 20th to allow everyone a chance to speak, especially for those who may be out of town or celebrating the holiday. But for those who are here and wishing to speak at this time, please submit, well, actually, we should submit a speaker sheet to Ingrid, or if you have a written protest, you can also turn that in at this time. Do you have any slips yet, Ingrid? Okay, our first speaker is Deb Horn, and the speaking time is 3 minutes.
Mayor and council members, gosh, I have not been here since the pandemic. So it's
Good to
nice to
see
see you. And thank you, staff. Fabulous report. All those details are great. And I know we need to raise rates. And I know it's challenging. I know this is complex. So I'm going to talk about Proposition 218. Did you go over 218? Okay. So I'm going to just read this. I should be able to do it in 3 minutes. It's one page. Fee increases to citizens such as water and sewer increase that is the subject of this hearing are governed by Proposition 218, a measure that the voters of California approved in 1996. It's called the Right to Vote on Taxes Act. The measure protects taxpayers by limiting the methods by which local governments exact revenue from taxpayers without their consent. While water and sewer fees can be excluded from distributing ballots by mail or including the increase in an election, these fee increases must meet specific definitions and provisions in the law or they trigger a vote. So I'm protesting this increase based on 2 items. My first protest is that this new fee includes an extension of an existing fee, which triggers a vote. The citizens of Brisbane are already paying for the capital project charge, which was talked about. It's $20 million in water and sewer improvements that include the replacement and repair of our water and sewer lines that you passed in 2014. Increased in 2020, I believe maybe it was 2020, and will increase 2 more times for a total of 20 years. That's $20 million. This new fee that we're discussing tonight, called the water and sewer rates, also includes replacement and repair of sewer lines as described in your mailer of February 17th, 2023. This guy. So this is an extension of the capital project charge, and it does trigger a vote. My second protest point is that the new water and sewer rate increases must meet the definition of a property-related fee, as does the capital project $20 million fees that you passed in 2014. The definition is defined as actual service usage per property, not property ownership. Let's see. I call attention to the flat fee charge that's the largest increase of the whole adjustment on the sewer bill. So in 2027, every user must pay a flat fee of $153.63. And that's whether they use water or not.
Please wrap up.
Pardon?
Please wrap up.
Okay, this is the same fee for residential as it is commercial. The variable fee for 2 CCFFs is only $18.67. So if a residential home has a water and sewer account, whether or not they use any water or sewer service, they must pay $153.66. The methodology used on this rate increase is flawed. This does not meet the definition of property-related fee, which is limited by the proportion of actual use. This large flat fee does not meet the water and sewer exclusion of the Right to Vote Act, the Right to Vote on Taxes Act. It triggers a vote. Anyway, there's more in my letter, but I'll just leave it there. It's those 2 points.
Thank you. Would the city attorney like to respond?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the public comment. On property, on 218, it is also impacted by the later Proposition 26 and court decisions. Under those court decisions, there is clarity that the one area that is ill-defined and open to interpretation is this area of the law and the notion of a public vote on a water rate increase, for example. That's just one of 3 examples. So I appreciate exactly where you're coming from on the notion of the protest procedure, but that falls into the city's discretion. What doesn't fall into the city's discretion is who gets to vote. The vote has to be the property owners, or if there's a somebody who's paying the pass-through cost of the water directly, they get to vote. But that gets resolved when there's 2 protests received and the city looks and says, well, who's paying this? So the city doesn't have discretion on who votes. It does have discretion on the procedure, the disclosure, how many, whether it's in writing, whether it's by email, that kind of thing. On the other question, we just frankly disagree. I understand exactly where you're coming from. You're reading from the initiative itself, but there's been multiple cases interpreting it and Prop 26. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Anyone joining virtually?
We have Diana and Prem Law.
Okay, so we'll start with Diana.
Council members, thank you for holding this hearing, and staff, thank you for your input, and to our consultant, thank you very much. Moved to Brisbane in 2001 in June, and then went to city council meetings about water sewer increases in August of 2001. It was contentious. It was in the bottom of the community center, and it went on, and people, it went until past midnight. It was there. Cy Bollingoff was on the council then, as was Lee Panza. I guess my concern here, one of the things that the consultant said was we need to have a prudent financial policy. As a business owner, I'm a little disturbed by when we did this thing in 2001, where council said we haven't raised the rates for a long time. Then we did another study, and now we're 20 years later, and we're looking at this. And so there's big sticker shock for people. I appreciate the slides from the consultant, but you're breaking things into water and sewer. And so when you look at those little pieces from this is where we are now, this is where we're going to be in 5 years, it doesn't really lay out exactly what it's going to cost us on a monthly charge. It'd be really helpful to see, instead of here's the, the purple costs and here's this, it's like, what's this going to cost us, and put them together. It's pretty shocking. When we moved here in 2001, we were house poor. So to have the increases, like, oh my gosh, this is a big increase, because we looked at what the utility rates were before we moved here. And then now we're going into a place where we're going to be on fixed income. And so 20 years later, and I realize that, we've got a 5-year window here, but my concern is what it's going to do to people. But how can we not be in this place again? How can we not do this every 10 years and shock people? So we need to fix whatever's going on, where we take a look at this on a more current basis. The consultant said you can do this every 5 years, so let's not wait like 10 and 12. And I realized it's like, well, we didn't want to upset people during COVID, but during COVID, more people were working at home. They were using more water and more sewer because people weren't going to their offices. So I'm sure we went backwards there. So I would have just asked that we take a look at actually putting something in place, so this isn't an every 10-year sticker shock to people. Thank you.
Thank you. Can staff do that, prepare that type of graph for when we continue the public hearing? Okay. Prem?
Okay, Prem Law, Brisbane resident. Thank you for holding the meeting tonight, council members and city staff. What essentially I am here to talk about essentially is what was stated in the letter of February 17th, and also on that frequently asked question handout that the city prepared. And essentially it is the line, no protest will be accepted if sent via email, text, fax, or other electronic means. If there is no majority protest, the proposed rates may be adopted. There may be only one written protest for each parcel affected by the rate increase. Now, per the letter that I submitted, essentially, there is nothing in Proposition 218 which prevents response to the communication of the city by means of electronic emails or uploads or faxes or anything like that. And Proposition 218 has nothing stating that. The only thing that Proposition 218 states is that the agency, which is in this case the city of Brisbane, the agency shall provide written notice by mail of the proposed fee or charge to the record owner of each identified parcel upon which the fee or charge is proposed for imposition, the amount of the fee or charge proposed to be imposed upon each, the basis upon which the amount of the proposed fee or charge was calculated, the reason for the fee or charge, together with the date, time, and location of a public hearing on the proposed fee or charge. And then it says later, at the public hearing, the agency, once again, in this case, the city of Brisbane, shall consider all protests against the proposed fee or charge. If written protests against the proposed fee or charge are presented by a majority of the owners of the identified parcels, the agency shall not impose a fee or charge. So once again, Proposition 218 says nothing about how the recipients of the mailing can respond. And therefore, it was the city of Brisbane which decided that you were not going to accept any responses sent by electronic means. And I consider that inappropriate. It's very easy to set up a fax number or to set up a link where people can upload documents electronically, considering that in the year 2023, almost everyone communicates written documents electronically. Hardly anybody sends written documents in paper form. And by refusing to accept these protest letters in anything other than paper form, I consider that extremely inappropriate and unacceptable. And there's nothing in Proposition 218 which justifies that. So that's what I had to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item?
We have a raised hand from Michelle Salmon.
Okay. Go ahead.
Dear Council, I am so sorry that this decision has been put on you. I also attended the meeting in 2001 and 2012, and I knew this was coming for a really long time. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter whether, how you protest or whatever. No one wants this rate increase, but it's a fact of life. The sewer charges are going to triple in 4 years because what are we going to do with it? There's more people. You need to process it. Laws have changed about how you can process it. We don't put raw sewage in the ocean anymore, which is a good thing. And water, it's our second most precious resource next to air. And you're doing what you have to do. And I'm really sorry about the fact that prior councils didn't ease us into this thinking they were saving us some pain, and now the pain's going to be real. But I appreciate the work you've done, and I appreciate that we have to do this. And I also appreciate the fact that we have been making improvements in the structure and the sewer line and everything else. So do what you have to do, and we'll just bite the bullet and do it. And this is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be easy for anyone. But it's a fact of life, and it's happening all over the country, and it's certainly happening all over the area. If you look on next door, you see people complaining about water bills way bigger than ours. And it's been going on for a long time for other cities, and now we have to pay the piper too. So I just wanted to be a voice out here that says, thank you for doing what you have to do. So that's it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak at this time? Let me just make sure that there's nobody else wishing to speak, and then people who've already spoken can get a second turn. Is there anyone else virtually?
Madam Mayor, I see no more hands.
No? Okay. You can speak, Deb, but please make it brief since you've already had a chance to speak.
So I'm just going to ask you all to look at that flat charge, because when we were looking at our water bill in comparison to San Bruno and all of our neighbors, we looked at the 64.20, that bill, that flat charge. We didn't really extrapolate out to get to 2027, where there's a flat fee of 153.66. And I'm very familiar with Proposition 26, which really did put more teeth into this act. It defined everything. So I know what I said was very technical, but I did work for the PUC for the City and County of San Francisco for 17 years. I'm very familiar with this. It's all very complicated and technical. But you really need to look at this large flat fee that's not proportionate to especially residential owners, and reconsider.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? All right, is the council amenable to continuing the public hearing until April 20th?
I would rather just get this over with so that we can get this enacted and move forward with having a rate structure that meets the needs of the water and sewer needs of the city.
Okay.
I think that we've had several meetings about this. We've let the people know, and I don't think that putting it off by another couple weeks or a month is going to make a big difference. It may delay implementation by another 2 months, depending on when it falls and when the resolution goes into effect. But I think we have enough information. We've all heard it over and over again to move forward.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I got a question. So Tom, so the previous caller, talked about the way that the public can submit a protest. So, we're just following the law, right? And so can you just kind of provide just, what are the options for the public in regards to protest? And how it's received?
Mr. Law is absolutely accurate. 218, together with the follow-up case law, 26, although not 26 on this particular point, leaves this question. It's with as prescriptive as California law is, this one is left open. It's up to the city to make a determination about what it believes is the appropriate protest procedure, as long as the property owner or the beneficial interest owner, payer, has a right to vote. And the reason, as I understand it, that the city did not go to electronic means, and frankly, had I been asked, I would have totally agreed with them. So I'm not trying to say there's a difference here, is that one thing that has happened in recent years is fax machines get jammed up with junk that where one person puts in 50 things with a different name on it. You can't control for bots yet on this kind of thing, for email protests and so on. Is it moving that way? It absolutely is. But with a city of this size, a staff that has limited capacity to deal with that level of abusive process, I think it's entirely reasonable that they decide to do it by hand delivery, and gave 45 days notice to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you for providing that explanation. And then, the flat charge and the variable charge. Catherine, you talked about that. The reason that we're doing the flat charge is so that we're not so tied to
You'll need to speak into the microphone.
Well, with the sewer fund, the majority of your costs are fixed. So we're trying to actually align your rate structure with your costs. So the fixed charge is higher for sewer because your majority of your costs are fixed. And with sewer, there's really not much because the residential use is based on your 4 months consumption during the winter, which is typically the lowest use. We can't rely on the variable portion to, I guess, the variable revenues are variable, meaning if people use less water, then you'll collect less in the variable charge. So therefore, based on your costs, we decided to put most of the costs on the fixed charge. And the cost for the city to treat residential versus commercial customers isn't significant. Therefore, we decided to spread that cost evenly. And that's why the residential and the commercial customers paid the same.
All right. And you know, when we were having our subcommittee meetings, you know, we're talking about like making sure that we follow the law, right? That we're
Yes.
fair.
Yes.
And fair means being fair to everyone,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes, there could be different rate structures. And in our rate study, we explain why, you know, these costs are contributed to the fixed charge versus variable charge. But yes, there are different rate structures, but we believe that what we proposed is most fair and most aligned to what your actual costs are.
okay, thank you.
So back to keeping the public hearing open or closing it and moving to discussion. My thought was, again, that we've had citizens request that we keep it open because, you know, there are Jewish holidays happening right now, there are Christian holidays happening right now, and it's also spring break. People are out of town. And this is a significant amount of money that's going to impact people. So I think that I've connected with staff, and I think that if we were continuing it till the 20th, we wouldn't run into any timeline problems with implementing these changes. Correct me if I'm wrong. Councilmember O'Connell wishes to move forward at this time. So I would like to hear from other council members specifically about whether you want to close the public hearing or whether you want to continue it.
Madam Mayor, if I may, with deference to Councilmember O'Connell's concerns, I think continuing this to our next meeting is not going to delay anything significantly. It gives public a chance to kind of absorb what's been said, think about whether they have additional questions. Staff can come back with some information requested tonight. And as Councilmember O'Connell pointed out, probably we'll be close to making that decision. And I wouldn't anticipate a long deliberation the next meeting on this.
Councilmember Lentz,
I'm on the same page with Colleen.
Councilmember Cunningham.
I have a question for staff before I make my comment.
Okay.
If we are going to continue this to the 20th, which I support, can we either in the interim or now or by the 20th have exactly what is required? And Councilmember Lentz alluded to it a little bit earlier, what the LIRA program actually means to people in town. And I know, Clay, you and I had a conversation, and I asked you what other assistance would there be for very low income families in town? And you had suggested there was another county or state program available. Can we either talk about that now or have that ready for next
You
meeting?
feel comfortable talking about it now?
Let's have that ready for next meeting, I
You want-
think.
We can do it at next meeting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Caroline's been working on it, but we'll have it ready for the next meeting.
Okay,
And then
that's great.
also-
I just think it would be helpful to people who are really worried about that big rate.
And then also, I think a graph that shows all of the charges together in one. So we will just go over that again, because I think that the public hasn't absorbed that, because that was a comment that was made in public comment. So maybe we can go through that slide a little bit more in detail so people can see what the overall changes
So
are.
my question, I mean, we had 4 callers to call into protest and we had 10 letters, I believe,
12.
over the 45 days. And I'm not sure that while it will give more information to the public about what's coming down the pike, I'm not sure that we're really accomplishing anything by delaying this, but that's certainly the choice of this council. I think we just keep putting off the inevitable, and are we planning to have the same presentation again? Or is it going to be continuation? What would the requirements, people who come into the meeting for the second meeting are not going to have the information that the first meeting had? So are we going to just do another presentation of this nature?
In my mind, I think we would just have staff address specific questions from people who've come up with comments like we did tonight. But I don't see the harm in giving people more of an opportunity. Like I said, I want to respect that this is going to have a big impact on people and just show that we're concerned and we care and we want to give everyone ample opportunity to speak. I think the criticism that we're holding this meeting at this time is a fair one. I mean, to me, I don't think that to hold this meeting during spring break when a lot of people are out of town gives people the opportunity to come and speak in person. As we know, a lot of people aren't going to write, they're not going to write a letter. So we need to give them other opportunities to come. And yes, we may find at that time that we need to just proceed with, like you said, the inevitable, and we need to move forward with this, but we can do so knowing that we listen to our community, that we gave everyone ample opportunity to come here and speak, and we've heard your concerns, and then move forward. But I think that there will be, to me, I think that there will be a lot of criticism for us to move forward at this time when it's highly inconvenient for the public to be here. So I'm seeing, are you in favor?
Proceed to the 20th.
Okay. So I'm seeing 4 in favor of continuing the public hearing until April 20th.
Madam Mayor, you should do a motion to continue the hearing.
Okay, I'll make a
roll call.
motion to continue the public hearing until April 20th.
I'll second that.
Councilmember Cunningham,
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz,
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin,
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell,
Aye.
Mayor Davis.
Aye. Okay, so now we'll move on to new business item N. Update on,
Mayor, I'm sorry, can you please remind us, remind the public that what are written protests can also now be extended till.
right,
meeting
so
date.
protests concerning the rate increase must be in writing and must be delivered in person or be sent by mail to the city clerk. 50 Park Place, Brisbane, California, 94005. All written protests must be received by the city before the close of the public hearing, which is April 20th. No protests will be accepted if sent via email, text, fax, or other electronic means. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll now move on to new business item N, update on proposed residential parking permit program for Central Brisbane. The purpose of this item is to present council with complete streets safety committee's residential parking permit program recommendation to address the complex parking scarcity issue in Central Brisbane. It is being recommended to adopt the Complete Streets and Safety Committee's recommended parking permit program guidelines and or provide direction to staff. So we'll go ahead and start with our staff report from Karen Kinzer.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. You've mentioned the issue. It has been brought to the committee a number of times over the past several years. So the Complete Street Safety Committee wanted to investigate the issue. They began with, my mic is not. All right, sorry about that. Began with collecting data on parking scarcity in Central Brisbane in the fall of 2020. Some of this information you've heard before because we did bring concepts to you last year. They found that of the 6 segments in town that were randomly selected, that they were at 90% capacity. So impacted, the parking was impacted. The survey was done in the evening after the commute hours, 6 to 7 p.m. I wanted to go in just a little bit of background on the survey results. Ingrid, those are the slides that I gave you. can go to the next, there you go. So again, after the data was collected, we decided to do a parking survey. In August of 2021, we had 329 residents' responses collected, which is maybe 10% of the adult community. 80% believed there was a shortage, either strongly or somewhat, in central Brisbane. Next slide. 78% believe there was a shortage on their block, strongly or somewhat. Next slide. The believed cause of the shortage was people on my block have too many cars. People do not use their driveway or garage for car parking. There's not enough physical space on the street. Non-residents, visitors parking on my street, and overflow from nearby businesses or other streets. Next one. We offered a number of solutions to get people's feedback on what they were interested in. 70% say they supported some city action. The parking permit program concept, 64% either somewhat or strongly supported doing that. There was a slightly higher support for a street sweeping program. And that was the results of the survey. So in April of 2022, staff brought in, on behalf of Complete Streets, a phased plan to council that consisted of doing a PR program, be a star, get a car off the street was one step, first step. And then the second step was street sweeping on all residential streets with enforcement. And then if those were not successful, the last step was going to be to implement a residential parking permit program with a vote of the community. Council's direction was to just go forward with a residential parking permit program and bring a proposal back to the council. So at that point, the committee began their investigation and they came up with some guidelines. I'm going to turn this section over to Assistant Engineer Tomas Santoya Velasquez to talk about what happened. He's been with Brisbane since January of last year, so very involved in that part as well.
Good evening, Council. So over the past year, the Complete Street Safety Committee has been developing the guidelines for the proposed residential parking permit program. The guidelines were developed by researching local Bay Area cities that have existing parking programs and through the personal experiences of the committee members who are residents of Brisbane. The guidelines are as follows. The program will be in effect throughout central Brisbane, including Visitation Avenue, excluding private roads on the backside of San Bruno Avenue, for which no street parking exists. The idea here was to have one encompassing zone so as to not have a situation in which people are merely moving to another block to avoid any sort of program. Each household may apply for and receive up to 2 permits. Accessory dwelling units may be issued 1 additional permit. In our research, we found that cities varied in their permit issuance from 4 to 3, as many as 5. But we found that smaller cities like Sunol and San Bruno had issued only 2, and we opted for the more conservative route. Guest parking should be included in the program, but the Complete Street Safety Committee did not decide upon a specific recommendation on the number to be allowed. Staff suggests 14 permits per year per household, 7 per year for ADUs. Guest parking would not be allowed whether the household obtains year-round parking permits or not. So for example, if you had a visitor for 2 weeks, their car could be parked for 14 days on the street with a guest parking permit. The permit program hours are recommended to be 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Sunday through Thursday. The program will not be enforced on city recognized holidays. The reason these hours were chosen in particular was because we found through our survey results that the core of the issue was not finding parking in the daytime, but rather residents who leave their cars on the street for long extended periods of time, bordering weeks or months. And the idea here is that so as to not disturb daily operations with parking, the enforcement would be focused on night. The program will include a reduced permit fee for qualifying low-income residents. The first year of the program is recommended to be free of charge. The qualifications for eligibility for a reduced permit fee would be similar to the qualifications for eligibility for the low-income rate assistance for utility bills. The first year of the program is recommended to be free so as to ease a transition into this substantial change. And then finally, and a very important point emphasized by the committee, implementation of a parking permit program should be subject to a public advisory vote. Thank you.
So we also, a little bit more, we also talked about how a program would be implemented and what it would actually cost either to the city or to the residents that were getting a permit. And because it's, to be able to run such a specific defined program, we looked at using consultants to do permit issuance and management. And there are some out there. South San Francisco uses the company that we looked at, IPS, Integrated Parking Solutions, is I believe what they're called. And they would manage the whole program. They have an initial setup fee of $5,000 when you've decided what your program is. And then to issue each permit is about $20, depending on whether a person's using a credit card. And we looked at hang tags, stickers, and then license plate readers. We were guided towards license plate readers, and all of these steps we worked together with the police department, and Commander Garcia was involved in that. And they kind of guided us towards license plate readers because there are concerns about actually marking cars. So license plate readers are effective and efficient. So the permit cost, the actual fee to issue that could be less. That company then would have all those electronic files, and they could also integrate with an enforcement group. So we found Laz Parking does enforcement in San Bruno and San Francisco, and they do license plate reading type of enforcement. And so they'd be able to drive around the city with their license plate reader and collect who has a permit or not very easily. They do not currently do enforcement during the night hours. So they told us that the fee was around, per the agenda report, $130,000. And that would be a full-time person for those 5 days a week going around and doing that enforcement. Putting those costs together, there's cost to manage the enforcement, cost to have the permit work, and some staff time to kind of manage and support the program. We're thinking that that permit fee is around $100 per permit, for that to be no additional extra costs into the budget. Again, Complete Streets is recommending that the first year be free to residents so that there's kind of an ease of adoption, an on-ramp onto it. We also talked a little bit about raising the enforcement cost to achieve compliance, and they wanted to phase in something like that. So this kind of fiscal impact doesn't even consider if there would be revenue from these tickets. That was kind of not factored into the costs. And we are, I think we have the consultants and the ability to start a program if the council were interested, but we're kind of looking for, do you want more? Do you want something different? Or do you think this is something that we should go forward with? And you may have noted that we have two Complete Street members here, Patrick Tainter, former chair, and Darius Wozniak, current vice chair. And maybe another one or two are on Zoom. They said they might try to join on Zoom.
Fantastic, thanks. We'll start with council questions. Councilmember Lentz.
All right, thank you. So just kind of looking at the total cost, Karen, 2,900 permits, $100 per permit, so $290,000. And then, if we had citations, I'm assuming that we would have financial penalty, So what is, say, you mentioned San Bruno. Do you know what they charge for the parking violation?
No, we didn't look into that. I'm familiar with San Francisco charges, but I know that ours is quite a bit less.
Yeah, San Francisco is brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to,
go there.
Not move your car when the street sweeper is coming by.
And I think we're at about 35 right now for a parking citation.
About $40.
$40.
About 40, okay.
Yeah, we didn't check the neighboring agencies for this because in the initial phase in, the Complete Streets Committee isn't recommending raising those rates, although we did ask the community about that and there was some support.
Okay. So, I mean, like implementing something like this and say having it for 3 years and maybe you had some kind of revenue. Yeah, that would be a significant amount of money. Potentially $700,000, $800,000, right? So, okay. And so like those costs, did the committee, kind of talk about that and like, about that burden on the city's finances?
In terms of not charging.
Well, I mean, to implement, was like something that they talked about, like, did they feel like that was worth the cost to the city?
No, I don't think they looked at it from the perspective of the community and not wanting to have to pass on that $100 a year permit fee up front so that people might be more willing and sort of see the benefit before those costs were passed on to them.
Okay. And then the, having it go before a public advisory vote. So that would be like a primary or general election type situation.
Yes.
Just put it on the ballot. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Those are the only questions I have.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Connell.
So in the initial year, the city, the committee was suggesting that we would still require our citizens to get our residents to get a permit. And we would be doing enforcement and ticketing, but we would not be charging for the initial permit.
Correct.
But they would still be limited to the initial 2 permits
Per household.
per
yes.
household.
Yes.
And if I'm wondering with the enforcement, if we had this company driving around checking meters or checking license plates. So the first time they drive by, if the car is not registered with the permit, they would get a ticket.
Correct.
So if someone just stopped by to drop off a hot meal at midnight to someone's house, they would technically be able to get a ticket and there'd be no way to prevent that.
I think we talked about other agencies that have a 2-hour window that you can park without a permit, but because we were looking at 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., we wanted it to be completely during those hours that you had to have a permit or a guest permit. One nuance of it, which I know doesn't work for everyone because not everyone has a driveway or a garage or anything else, is that if you have space off street to park, you can still get a permit. You put your car on the street and your guest parks in your driveway and you don't even need a guest permit. This is only for on-street parking.
Okay. And people that have more than 2 vehicles on the street could take their 2-week guest permit. And if you'd get 14 a year, that's half a year you could park on the street.
No, I think there's some confusion. The 2 weeks is the 14 days.
2 week for 14 days, but then you get another permit for 2 weeks.
No, just that's
It's
the
like
total.
singular days.
Yeah.
And you get 14 of them. I think.
14 one-day passes
Yes,
per year.
yes.
Okay, so if you had your aunt came to visit and was staying with you for a couple weeks, that would take your entire years with parking for the extra
Guest
vehicle.
parking, yes.
And there would be no safe haven for them to go to some other area or street to park a vehicle.
Not in central Brisbane.
Not in central Brisbane. Where they have, everybody has garages there. Okay, and then the other question was the so we wouldn't have a grace period at all, but if someone were having an unexpected visitor, they could perhaps park blocking their own driveway. So it would only affect legal street parking.
I'm gonna see if Commander Garcia wants to.
Oh, that's a
Answer
good
that.
question.
Madam Councilman, what do you mean blocking your driveway? Just like in the street still? Because the reader would read every vehicle on the street. So
Every
it would still
vehicle
be applicable
on the
to.
street, whether it was blocking your own personal
Correct,
driveway.
because that
My-
by California Vehicle Code is still against the law.
Okay, so my question would be, so if you have, say you have 2 cars or 3 cars and you have a driveway space, you'd always have to make sure that the one car that had the permit or didn't have the permit was in the driveway.
Correct, they would.
So you wouldn't
force
be
the
able to
residents-
split your one on-street parking permit with a second vehicle that you rotated.
Well, if you had a third vehicle, you can keep it on a driveway and then you could keep the 2 permit vehicles on the street. Correct. You
Right,
wouldn't
but-
need a permit for that third vehicle because it's off the street.
Okay, and would there be allowances made for replacement vehicles? Say your vehicle's in the shop, you're driving a loaner car. Would that be still subject to the maximum 14 days?
We could treat that as on a case by case basis by calling in. I mean, obviously we'd also thought about this if you had a child visiting for the summertime and they're out of school, then we could definitely take that a case by case basis. It would be an open and closed date. So they would start on a certain day and close on a certain day. If you did have a repair bill or a repair invoice that your vehicle was in the shop, we could deal with that in that process as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Oh, we have some problems to solve. Okay, so great questions, Terry. I know she just threw a whole bunch of stuff in no works, and I completely agree. I have wanted this in place for a long time for different reasons. Brisbane is advertised on various travel sites as the place to park your car when you're going to SFO for cheaper parking. That was one of my problems. We had a resident living on my street who at any one time had 26 vehicles parked on the street because he owned a car repair business. That would take care of that problem, and it has been resolved, by the way. But we do have a lot of vehicles who are parked here who go on vacation and come back and kind of boast the fact that they've got free parking in Brisbane. So when we first brought this up a long time ago, we were thinking maybe of doing selective streets that have identified problems. Is that an option that Complete Streets looked at rather than blanketing Brisbane? I mean, there are some streets that don't have a parking problem. I don't know which ones they are, but mine certainly does. And
Mendocino is like where I've lived on 2 blocks of Mendocino and
nightmare,
no,
no problem.
people, it's not like it's not intense. Yeah. So, but you know, every street is different, I suppose.
Yeah, so I thought when we initially had this conversation that we would do a pilot run on the streets that are identified as an issue. Thomas is one, Tulare is one. I don't know the other streets, but those 2 streets for sure are
Kings.
a huge Kings. And I'm sure there's a couple of people sitting in this room who's going to put their street on that list too. And so that's just a thought I have, is that we do a selective pilot.
Okay, well, hold on. We're on questions.
Oh, sorry.
Do you have any
Can we do that?
questions?
Question.
We can do that. What the committee thought about was that if part of the problem we're trying to solve is storage, cars that aren't used a lot but are stored on the street, is that then that problem will just move to another block. And I think we did hear that feedback from possibly one of the other council members, liaisons, that the committee spent quite a bit of time thinking about it, and we proposed zones and we suggested that, you know, other cities use zones or blocks or whatever, and they really felt that someone's just gonna go park on the next block, particularly if they're storing that car and not moving it very much.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilmember Mackin.
Hot potato issue. I want to first thank Complete Streets and staff. This has been a difficult project. One might dub it a thankless job because everyone wants something to fix it and nobody wants to grapple with the problem. Also thank all my colleagues for your questions, and I wanted to then just go back, and there is a question in here. Councilmember Cunningham, where you talked about if we did certain streets, do we not then, question for staff, run into how do we effectively enforce it? Because if you're talking about cost to enforce, are you enlisting our police department to do enforcement? And you're proposing an outside firm to do enforcement. So the less streets you have, you're paying a higher cost for enforcement, right? And that becomes the issue. I would also say living down in the flatlands, I can attest to people on the upper streets come bring their extra cars down because they park, switch cars, and you routinely see they'll get out of one and park one, and then a couple days later you see them pick that one up, and they move cars around because there's no space. Question on this again, just to clarify. You said the IPS group, and that's $20 per permit issuance. If we have license plate recognition, you don't need that $20, or do you still need it to manage and do citation tracking?
You'll need less of that $20.
Okay, so that is variable.
Yes.
And then you would still need someone like LAZ parking to do the enforcement end.
Yeah, I mean, what we heard, staff heard from police staff is that they don't have the capacity to be doing that enforcement every night.
Okay, and the dollar figure of 130,000 is an estimation, doesn't include citations, potentially offsetting those costs.
Correct.
Okay, and so back again to Commander Garcia, in answer to the questions about visitors or rental vehicles or your cars being fixed, or you've got Aunt Bertha has to come visit for 2 weeks. These are things that we could deal with on a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely. We wouldn't leave that to the company. We would have them referred back to us.
Okay. So that is actually all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, I will entertain public comment. I have a slip here already from Sherry Goodwin. The time, you asked your question. Did you not?
I
ask your-
did.
Okay.
Yeah, I was first.
And the time for speaking is 3 minutes.
Sherry Goodwin is actually on Zoom, and she has forwarded me an email. She said that she's falling asleep right now, so she'd like me to read a portion of
Okay.
her comment. I would like to speak out against permit parking in Lower Brisbane, which approved may no doubt eventually lead to permit parking on all residential streets in town. Here are some of my concerns about why I think this is a bad idea. How much will it cost and who pays to enforce this? I feel that this will punish people who have more than 2 cars, which can mean multi-generational families, people with teenagers, the poor in multi-family living situations, or those who have an extra car for family visitors. Permit parking does not guarantee you have a space that's in front of your house or your street. Personally, I prefer that our police department focus on crime and not who is parked without a permit. We already have a solution to those who leave cars unattended for days. Call the city and they will be red tagged and towed. The committee is supposed to be dedicated to street safety, but this just seems to me like overkill and government intrusion. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay. I'm seeing that we have some slips here.
We also have a raised hand from Michelle Sam.
Okay, we'll go with Michelle Salmon. 3 minutes.
I also would like to thank the Complete Streets and Safety Committee and the staff for their work. However, I'm not in favor of this. We live in a house that was started in 1929. We do not have a garage. We do not have a driveway. And yet there are a lot of houses in Brisbane who have decided the entire frontage of their property is a driveway. There's an example of that on Lake Street, and it's like, 50 feet. And that's not, maybe even more. And that's not really fair to the neighborhood. The other thing is that I feel that we haven't done a good job of enforcing parking and the 72-hour rule. I mean, Cliff, you left a car on the street for months and it didn't get tagged or moved until I complained. And this happens all the time. And so if we're going to try, before
It was
we
an
try
art
this,
piece, Michelle.
yeah, right. It became an art piece with, 3 months worth of
Public
debris on
art.
top of it. But the problem is that I think before we enact any kind of ordinance like this, we should try enforcement of our current ordinance. I mean, there was another car on our street. It hadn't been registered since 2019 and had grass growing all around the tires. And I was walking one day during the pandemic and I went, oh my God. And so I called, and the next thing I know, the car's off the street and in the people's garage. Okay. So, we're not enforcing the rules we already have. What makes us think we're going to enforce this any better? I think that we should have an enforcement officer that goes around, drives all around town and looks. It's really easy to tell if a car's been there for a while. It's got grass going around the tires. So I think we should try enforcement before we do this, because I see a host of problems involved in this. And if somebody is running a business out of their home with 20 cars on the street, that shouldn't be allowed either. They should have a business license, and it shouldn't be allowed in a residential zone. And the addition of ADUs is a real serious problem as well. So I'm not in favor of this until we have exhausted all other avenues. And I'd also like to know what you define as central Brisbane. Because if you're going to have an ordinance, it should be citywide, not just focused on one area. And honestly, the city has compounded the problem by not planning parking for the new library, thinking that was fine. So I really think that there's a whole lot of issues here, and I'm not in favor of this, however much work has gone into it. I think that we need to enforce the rules we already have before we go to this. And people should call if they see a car on the street for a couple of days that doesn't belong there. Call. This is not airport parking. And I've told all my neighbors and friends, you can't park here when you travel. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Deb Horn.
Mayor, council members, I'm addressing the first part to Michelle Salmon because I want to let you know, Michelle, I have a 2022 van that I park in front of an empty home that's not occupied, and the neighbor across the street has gotten my car tagged 10 times as an abandoned car. Because if you make an anonymous call, the police have to come out and put this very sticky tag that's very hard to get off your car. And I get tagged the day I drive it, so I just say, just enforcing the rules we have doesn't always work. Sometimes you get harassed with that. I would like to thank the committee, the advisory committee, and everybody who's trying to put their thinking caps on about this, because this is like a problem that irritates everybody here in town. And we can't just kick the ball down the road. I think we have to do something. There's some really good ideas, and maybe we just need to noodle on this some more. I'd love to see like a lot like across from Brisbane Inn that people can park for a fee. Maybe we can do some business development and they can make some money using that parking lot, or maybe the B of A parking lot, or maybe there's places where people can park for a fee if they have 27 cars. So maybe add some more onto this, but I totally support doing something. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mike Chandler.
City Council Mayor, thanks for the opportunity for this. My first objection is to non-codified exceptions to any sort of
potential for fines or sanction against parking. I think that a case-by-case basis is just a little too arbitrary. And it was brought up previously about the concept of selective enforcement. Somebody calls up, says, oh, this person here is parking something, even though it's not over a period of time, 3-day rule, for instance, doesn't matter. The police department has to respond to the complaint. And I think without codified exceptions, that means someone calls up and says, and this requires responsible citizenry. Hey, I have my aunt coming in from wherever she's visiting for the summer. Fine. I do not support non-codified exceptions to a parking thing. That will also reduce selective enforcement when it happens by accident. It gets back to how many permits will be permitted, ADUs. Okay, then it comes down to who is a resident? Is a renter a resident? Is a homeowner a resident? Who actually is a resident? If I'm renting out 6 rooms in my house to 6 different people, are they all residents? Who's going to have application to the parking permits? And then the other thing is I've noticed since I've lived here, which has only been 5-6 years, that a lot of the parking zones and street lines have not changed with respect to the new constructions. That should probably be re-examined as well. With respect to the mess in the central part of the Brisbane and the problems with the new library, I think that the central part of the city should define residential and commercial parking separately in some sort of fashion that would at least permit or empower the businesses in central Brisbane an opportunity to flourish, while perhaps it's a tough line to cross. So you look at Club 23, for instance, everybody wants that thing to turn into something in some fashion, whether it's a condo or a club again, but the opportunity for that has been erased by the parking problems. All right. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Leslie Davis.
Hello all, many of you friends. I've been in Brisbane since 1984, and this might be the 4th or 5th time I've come before you. I'm truly opposed to this parking permit. There's so many reasons. One, multi-generational households, every block has them. It's just the way of the world right now, that kids can't leave home. They can't afford it. So with 2 parking permits, it's just not going to work. What do homes do that have work vehicles? There are many people in town that have trades, and with all of the problems that we've had with stolen vehicles and broken into vehicles, people want to park those close to their homes, not down the block or at the 23 Club parking lot, anything like that. I don't see on my block a real problem. So I don't see that a parking permit is going to change anything on my block. Right across the street are 5 consecutive houses with 2-car garages. There's no car in any of those garages. When you think of the guest parking, and Terry, you brought up a good point about someone dropping off a meal. I volunteer with Mission Hospice. When you get a phone call at whatever time at night, you go. I don't want someone to have to go and possibly visit someone in Brisbane and get a ticket. Things happen, family emergencies happen. Something happens and you have to have someone come to your house. The last thing you're going to remember is to call to get a parking permit. I really think that this needs to be thought out differently. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item?
Madam Mayor, I received a text from Linda Detmer. She says, I want to remind everyone that the first year is a way to find the glitches and considered a living rollout. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Okay, we'll move on to.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, raised hand from Diana over Zoom.
Okay. We'll restart the timer for her, please.
Thank you for letting me speak out on this. Just spoke earlier, moved to Brisbane in 2001, live in the first 3 blocks of San Bruno Avenue. there are several multifamily units on San Bruno Avenue, and there's been a lot of ADUs built. That I don't have a problem with. I mean, some people have put signs out like "Don't park here," and we don't own the street spaces. Sometimes the driveways are kind of iffy because the property lines run in like. I mean, our driveway gets really narrow. If you get halfway down it, you can't open the doors to get out of the car because our house was built later between two other houses. But what my issue has been, I mean, when we had the permits for the Habitat for Humanity, I came to city council meetings and said, I think this is a great idea. This was early on in the 2000s. But let's be concerned a little bit about the parking issues and what can happen there. What I see is almost, I would say every other weekend, I see people drive up, park with somewhere within my block or up the street. They take their golf clubs and their suitcases out of their trunk, and they stand on the corner and wait for Uber or Lyft to come and get them to go to SFO. Those are the people that we need to watch out for because they're taking spots from people who live here who need to have the parking on the street. So I think it is, I see it almost every month where people are coming in and you know where they're going, and then the car sits there for a week or 10 days or over a long weekend. They're definitely using us for long-term SFO parking, and we need to figure out some way to enforce that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item?
I see another raised hand from Michelle Salmon.
Okay. Michelle, please make it brief.
I will. How long does it take to run a plate? Because it would be really easy to identify cars that aren't registered in Brisbane and help to cut down on airport parking. And also, just as a point of interest, there are a lot of driveways where you could park in your driveway, like at my father's old house. You can park in the driveway, but you can't park perpendicular to the street in the driveway because after they did the street project in the 80s, they shortened the driveway. So you either have to park in the garage or you would get tagged if you didn't have a permit to park. So it's not a perfect system no matter what we do, but I really think we should work harder on enforcement of current laws and enforcement of non-resident parking, airport parking, because it is a problem. It's even a problem up on our street. So we need a PR campaign that airport parking is not acceptable here and run the plates. If it's not a Brisbane resident, ticket in 72 hours. That's what I think.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. We're going to move to council discussion at this time. Is there anyone who wishes to go first? Okay, Councilmember O'Connell.
I just wanted to comment on one of the questions that was read to us, that when you're talking about central Brisbane, you mean all of Brisbane other than the Crocker Industrial Park, the Ridge, and Sierra Point.
Give me a second. Except for the private roads and the backside of San Bruno Avenue, which do not have any public street parking.
Okay. That's my only question.
Do you want to start discussion? Okay. Would you like to start discussion, Councilmember Mackin?
I would love to. Thank you. I would like a clarification from staff again. Under the recommendations of Complete Streets, it says implementation of a parking permit program should be subject to a public advisory vote. Would you please clarify what that means?
That was language from the city attorney.
City Attorney, could you
It was-
please clarify what that means?
Michael Roush. Oh,
Okay. I apparently
The other
missed
city.
that. I apologize. I'm going to have to ask the attorney who advised on that. I was a bit surprised myself, frankly.
Okay, thank
I
you.
apologize.
Don't mean to put you on the spot.
No.
Okay, so
I
a couple
apologize, and I-
things, just going over some comments that are made. Codified exceptions, I would agree with you. I think that needs to be very clear, so we all know ground rules. How many permits would be permitted to be issued? Great suggestion. Who's a resident? Good suggestion. If somebody's just in San Francisco and likes to travel a lot and is using Brisbane as their parking lot, I think we need to know they're not a resident. So anyone applying for a permit doesn't live in San Francisco just to use our streets for parking. Emergencies need to be thought out. Excellent point. How long does it take to run a plate? Is there a way to have our police do this? Commander Garcia, could you address that question?
In regards to enforcement, we would not have the capability to do that every night. As we have 3 officers at any given night, and at any given time, we may have an incident. So we may not have the ability to go out there and make the citations and look for those plates.
That would be a consultant, right? That the city would hire, and
Correct.
therefore, to Sherry Goodwin's point, it wouldn't be police officers that would be enforcing this program. It would be a separate consultant that would be doing that. So we would not be taking away police resources in order to implement this program, correct?
That's correct.
I think that's what you were following up on that, right? Yeah.
Okay, so a couple things I just want to go through on this. I'm going to kind of go all over the map. For 20 years, I've heard this issue go on. I think Randy, you could probably attest, and Karen Kinzer as well. This has come up over and over and over. People complain. It comes to the council. The council says, what do you want us to do? The public comes to the meeting and says, I don't want permits. And it goes in the same cycle over and over and over. But I thought what was significant here, Complete Streets really took this endeavor seriously, because when you have 70% of people surveyed saying you need to do something, are we going to just ignore that? I don't know. Do I want permits? No. Do you? No, nobody does. But for potentially $8 a month, you wouldn't have a parking problem. Is it worth $8 a month? Go get a Starbucks is $5, $6. You think nothing of it. But for $8 a month, you could come home at night and not have to drive streets upon streets upon streets. I heard about people who have commercial vehicles. Maybe they have work trucks. Maybe they pay more for a permit because that's a cost of their doing business. They shouldn't be paying the same as a resident who just wants to come home and park their car on the street. So I think there's ways that we can work this out. And I know it makes everyone cringe, the idea of permits. You just say it and everybody goes, I don't want it. And I heard, Michelle, I'm not going to pick on you, but when we say, I just think we need to deal with it, we have ordinances and we can do enforcement. Everybody I know that has ever talked to me about this, I'll say, do you call the police? And they go, oh, I can't do that. My neighbor will know. Nobody wants to. Nobody wants to be the enforcer. And so if some people have more vehicles, they're going to have to decide, are they going to buy a permit from the neighbor who's got plenty of parking? Maybe. That could be done. But I think it makes the field more equitable. And I think that's what people are looking for here. When over 70% say do something, everybody just says, look, let's just be fair. And some people are gaming the system and everyone else suffers because of it. And it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. So whether we like it or not, it's not going to get any better. There's more ADUs. That's one thing Brisbane has done, is build a lot of ADUs, and we have RENA numbers. We're going to see more. So we're going to have less and less street parking. And as for people who do airport parking, the difficulty there is it's another system that's game because you're putting the burden on our police. They have to wait 72 hours. They put a sticker, then they've got to wait another 72 hours. And guess what? I can tell you from what I've seen, by that time, that person that went out of town comes back and drives away. And all we've done is harass our own police department to play this game. And it's a circus. So I think one thing, rather than complaining about permits and, oh my God, the world is coming to an end, we can't have permits. It's just disrupting our psyche. Brisbane doesn't have permits. We could look at this as a positive measure to make our lives a lot simpler. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to come home and find parking on your street? Hard day at work, it's dark out at night, you don't want to walk blocks away. So I don't think we should negate it. I think we should probably come back with addressing some of these issues that have been brought up so that we would have a clearer idea. And I would like to hear then back from our legal advisor what was meant by bringing this to a public advisory vote. Because I think ultimately the council will be blamed if we vote in favor. The public will either love it or hate it, but I think the public needs to decide. And if the public says, oh, we want you 70%, we want you to do something about it, but then you vote against it, oh, well, you sealed your own fate. We can't do anything if you keep fighting it. So what do you want? That's what we come back to. So that's my thoughts on it.
Madam Mayor, before we move on. That was really rude how I responded to that question.
Your mic is maybe off.
Sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm realizing how rude and flip that response was to the question. I was just surprised by reading it in the staff report. An advisory board it is a sense of the public. It has no binding effect. It was surprising to me that on a program that would be this controversial that would be perceived as a recommendation. So advisory board votes are taken in some cities. But what it usually ends up in is the council's voted one way, the public's saying the opposite, whichever way you go, and you end up with stasis. But I should not have said it was, I was surprised by it. That's my own fault for reading the report this morning.
Thank you. Councilmember Lentz? Oh, Councilmember.
So could I just ask, could this actually be put to a vote on a regular election cycle?
Yeah, it absolutely can. And in fact, some would argue that it should.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lentz?
Karen, I know you had that slide that showed the responses from the public. How many people responded to the survey? It was like 300 and something?
329.
329. Okay, so this is 329 citizens. And are they all from central Brisbane, or is it throughout all of Brisbane?
It could have been anyone in Brisbane.
Anyone in Brisbane. Okay. Okay. So, I appreciate your passionate, position, Colleen, and I agree with you on a lot of those things, right? There's definitely those times when you hear from the public, they say, yeah, parking is an issue. And a lot of people talk about folks from SFO, or people going to SFO and they're not from Brisbane. We've talked a lot about, the multiple people have, a significant amount of cars and rotating them around, and what a pain in the, to have to deal with that. But, I've also heard from folks in town saying, hey, I don't really have a problem. Right. And so it seems like it's some streets have an issue while other streets don't. And folks from those other streets are saying, hey, that's kind of an inconvenience for me. Why should I have this, burden, right? That's how they look at it. And it's a very valid position. Karen, one of the things you brought up, which I was thinking the same thing, And I was going to mention it if you didn't during our discussion, was that pilot program. I thought the last time when we did talk about it a year ago, we were going to pick, whatever, 3 streets, 4 streets, and then see, does that work? And so, I'd like for us to do something like that. If they're, like maybe you survey, say that, we can identify some streets that are impacted, right? Survey those residents on the street. Do you want to participate in this? And if so, then okay, then let's do it. The question I think, that I have for staff is, if we did that, we can't really hire these folks to do just a couple of streets. We'd have to use some other means. And so if we were to do a pilot program, with the limited, police resources, is that even really feasible?
I don't think so.
Well, we didn't look into it. We could go back to LAS and ask them if they can do a partial enforcement, if there is a sliding scale on that. I mean, this was all of Brisbane. So in terms of, again, the police department taking this role on, it would be very difficult for us to be hitting all these streets every night if there was other crimes that we would have to get to. So for something that we could do every night, you're probably better off going back to LAS and see if they can kind of scale that down.
So, and I was the one that spoke to them and they said they don't do enforcement at the hours that we were requesting. That's why they gave us the cost for 1 full-time person. The committee, we took the data at 6, 7 p.m. And I think that was the original concept, is that was when it was difficult to park. But I think the committee felt like, well, you're going to have those guests during those hours. It's the overnight. Those are the ones that are really making the problems on the street. We don't want to preclude people that are coming over for dinner and then leaving by that time. So I think if you use LAS at 6 to 10 p.m., they might be able to provide part-time service, but I don't know that they can if you're looking for the overnight enforcement. So it'd still be that full cost.
Yeah, and those costs are pretty significant, right? We're looking at $290,000 a year. Sure, I guess we would get some money from citations, but the recommendation from the committee is that first year not charging anybody. We're just trying to kind of.
Well, I don't think that the recommendation was not to charge anyone. It was just not to charge the $100 fee
For the permit.
for the permit.
I thought
You'd still have to get a permit. And the other option would be to be a permit system with a sticker and then do enforcement based on complaint basis enforcement. But if it's a license plate reader, walking down the street, you're not going to know who's a permitted vehicle and who's not. It would have to go through the database system. And so, if it was a sticker system like in San Francisco, where they've got a neighborhood sticker on your bumper, anybody, police, citizen going by can see that that's not a permitted overnight vehicle. And, complaint driven with just those vehicles could be possible. And maybe not as much of a burden on our police force. Because that would be visible where, gee, that car's been there 2 days, it has no sticker. The police could come and immediately ticket that vehicle.
Right. And if that street is, part of that program, that part of the community is aware, right? And so they're going to be more diligent about.
Well, even if it's citywide or just a smaller program, that would be something that could be more complaint driven where, a neighbor is taking advantage of the system or there's cars that are consistently there that aren't permitted. So I think there's other ways to look at it, but
Yeah. So I guess,
I have a couple of comments when you're done, Cliff.
Yeah. You know what? I'm done for now.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay. So the fact that I personally know that there are several people in town who do call in spite calls to our police department who have to respond. That might be helpful for a couple of people. The second thing, and I think we need to address that. And the second thing I want to address is the multifamily situation, because that is going to increase. And I think it's pretty easy to figure out who a multifamily situation is, because those people, wouldn't their driver's licenses be registered to Brisbane or their vehicles be registered to Brisbane? So I don't think that's an issue. And so I think we need to throw this back in the pot. Sorry, guys, done a lot of work. Can we do a little bit more work on this and flush it out a little bit more? But we, I mean, one home right near me has 7 adults. They do have a 2-car garage that is never going to have a car in it, but 3 off-street parking spaces. So they're going to require 4 parking.
But are they?
stickers.
But are they? Is that actually going to, that's not going to solve the problem. Like, we could just give out all the parking permits for all the people that need them, and we will be in the exact same situation.
No, because
The point is that
the
people have to
cars
be
going to SFO won't be there.
Yeah, but what's the magnitude of that problem? Like, I think that we don't really have a true grasp on, are we inundated with, like, or are we unable to park all over Brisbane because we are just jammed packed with people who are here to go to SFO? Or is it really that we have that problem where we have 7 adults living in a house and they, like you just said, they have a garage that's never going to be used? So we're going to give them, they have 3 off-street parking spots, and so we'll give them 4 for the street. That's not actually getting at the problem, which is that people need to be motivated to clear out their garages and use their garages. So, and that's where you start getting, like the pushback, right? Because that's going to require a big change to people's behavior. That's going to require them changing how they use their garage, getting rid of stuff. So I just don't know how we handle that. Like, if you say it's only going to be 2 parking permits per unique address, and then you have those situations like people that have 7 adults, those people are screwed. Like, what do we do about them? Because if then we can just give all the parking permits to everyone who needs them, we will perpetuate this problem, and we will clear up maybe a little bit of an issue from SFO parking. But I don't think those people aren't parking on Kings. People going to SFO.
I don't know, there were 390 people said, or was it 70% of the 390 said there was a big problem? So.
No, it is a big problem, but it's how we administer permits that will determine whether we're going to fix this problem or not. And, you may say, like, if you don't have a garage or a driveway, unparkable garage or a driveway, or you just don't have, let's say you don't have either, right? Like, I lived in an 8-unit building, and we didn't have any off-street parking. All of us were on the street, and some of us were 2 people, like some apartments had 2 people. This was on Visitation in Mendocino. So, like, with that situation, you have so many units, and there's no off-street parking. So maybe you say, like, for example, Michelle Salmon mentioned her situation. She doesn't have any off-street parking at all that she can use. Maybe a household like that can get the option to have 3 or 4, but maybe it goes on like a sliding scale. So the first 2 could be 100, and then the third is like 300, or something that's a much bigger jump. I just don't see how. Personally, I hate the idea of permit parking. I think that it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. People are enraged about parking. We're going to implement a parking permit program, and guess what? People are going to be enraged about that. Like, I think that you create this parking permit program, and you'll create like 5 more other problems to try to address this one problem. And it might be great for some people who are like, I can breathe on my street now. And then other people are just pissed. So from that aspect, like, I want to create policies that I think that people people embrace and really are solving problems. And I could just see people hating this. But to Colleen's point, like it's one of those issues that you have to have something with a lot of teeth in order to change public behavior. Ultimately, I think it will have to go to a vote, but I think that there's a lot more things that need to be worked out. But I don't think that you can just give somebody who has, 7 adults living in the house, I don't think you can give out 7 permits or 4 permits, because then we're not actually moving the needle anywhere. So
Have we done a survey on how many parking spaces actually exist? And are we going to be giving out more permits than there are parking spaces?
It would be really difficult to calculate the capacity. It would actually be difficult to calculate the off-street parking. There is a standard parking. We would have to go onto private property to take measurements. None of the example agencies that we looked at considered the capacity versus the number that they're issuing. They chose a number because people could be out of town, their car could be in the shop. If you just issue 100, the exact amount of permits for the capacity, you're gonna not always have that work out. You're gonna have the guests, you're gonna have people gone. So, we talked at length about that, but decided that we wanted to choose the number, or the committee decided they wanted to choose the number, not counting the capacity of every street, because it's very difficult to do that too.
How do the other cities deal with this? Oh,
One other thing to consider, just listening to all of you. You could do away with the license plate reading and just issue stickers. If you had the minimum of 2 permits per house, some people are not going to use their permit. What happens in the city is there's a market of, I'll sell you my permit. And that's the equitable way the multi-generational homes, they get the permits.
that makes sense.
So, and it's a supply and demand. And if you had 4 cars that all need permits in a dwelling, maybe everybody splits the cost in that dwelling and says, that's just what it is.
But they do that at the Ridge, and there are, 2 spaces for every, let's say, condo, and there are some people that only need 1, and they lease out their other space, because if you park in the visitor parking, you can get in trouble.
Right. The other thing that was brought up, my colleague, Councilmember Lentz, said there's some areas where people go, I don't have a problem. When San Francisco years ago instituted the parking permits, as I recall, because I lived there at that time, they rolled it out by neighborhood. We could feasibly roll it out by streets. The public could contact Complete Streets and say, our street has a problem. We would like to be considered for initial phases of parking permits. It's one way to do it.
I have a slip here from Lisa Greenlee. I will say, Lisa, we're already moving into council discussion, so please make it really brief.
Hi, I'm Lisa Greenlee. Okay, so I lived in Pasadena for years when I was in college, and they had this whole parking permit thing. It was back in the 80s, so it was pretty low tech. You went to City Hall, you bought a sticker, it cost a certain amount, and you put it on your car. If you were going to a neighborhood that you didn't have a sticker for, they had like a paper guest thing that you could put on your dash, and you could use it for a couple of nights. You couldn't use it for much more than that because they were onto you if you used it for long term, but it was kind of an emergency thing. I think this really hurts multi-generational families. And I know that in this economy, housing is really tight. So we got to figure out how to deal with that. And also I worry about people who for health reasons need nurses overnight. That happened to a friend of mine. So some kind of emergency permit should also be given, but I like the sticker approach. But one thing that would be really helpful, at least on my street, is sufficient signage Because I think people pull up on my street and they do the airport parking thing all the time.
Your street that does
Yeah,
that
my
for
street,
sure.
Alvarado Street. Because there's nobody across the street from me on the school. So it's a parking lot. And that makes it hard for people who are in the apartments who need those parking spaces at those. So a sign just on our street that says parking 72 hours will be enforced, something that says what our current laws are now. Because I don't think people who come here from the airport know that there's a limit. And maybe if they kind of knew, they wouldn't leave it for 2 weeks, and it might be just a little bit more of a deterrent to have better signage, at least in some areas where we see a lot of out of town parking, because there's nothing right now. Okay.
Thank you.
That's a really good comment.
So I think that there's been a lot of suggestions here. I think we're at different levels of interest in a parking program. But I think because Complete Streets has really put so much work into this, and I know that there are council members that feel adamant about this, my suggestion would be to allow Complete Streets to maybe work some of these kinks out, maybe come up with some policies based on the comments that have been raised tonight, and we can bring this back. My guess is we would put this for a general election vote, which is kind of a ways away. So we have time to work on that. But I want to see what how the rest of the council feels about that.
Sounds like a good idea. It's never going to be perfect, but we've got to do something. For the people who are not affected, really happy for you. For the rest of us, it sucks. So we really need to do something.
So if we were to come up with some sort of ballot text to go to the ballot, how much leadway would we need before an election?
Well, you're really putting me on the spot tonight.
It depends if you'd like to do November
Yeah,
ballot or.
I would, but you also need the public input in advance. I'd say 6 months.
Thank you.
If I can add one item, if this was potentially stickers, it's $20 a year. That's really cheap to ensure your parking. So and in the meantime, Complete Streets, there are a lot of things that they could still refine on this, come back to us. And if the public could be made aware that they are trying to put together refinement of the proposal, and that any resident of Brisbane is more than welcome to submit their comments to them for consideration.
For clarification, stickers is $20 a year because there isn't someone patrolling the streets every night, all night, which means it would fall back on our police department, which would be a staff cost, or it would fall on residents calling in on other residents, which you said is unlikely to happen because people don't want to call.
Well, but the difficulty is some of the cars that are unknown, it would be hard for residents to call on because they don't know if they belong there or not. And so they're reluctant to do it if they are not sure it's maybe the neighbor's car. So the stickers just verify once and for all, it belongs there or it doesn't.
The stickers would fix Deb's problem.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, clearly a city like
Inexpensive.
San Francisco does it, and I'm sure they've really thought about this extensively. Okay.
And perhaps citation enforcement would help support the cost of this.
Cliff, are you?
Yeah, so it seems like we could cobble together something, right? I mean, I like your suggestion, Terry, about the sticker and having people call in. And you're right, maybe there would be some that wouldn't, but I think there'd be some that would. I do think though, choosing some streets, like you're saying, your street, Karen, I think we should try that in doing this kind of low tech, way of doing the parking permits, I think allows for a pilot program to happen.
I mean, Thomas, Tulare, Alvarado, Kings, Humboldt. Humboldt has a lot of spite stuff go on.
So right now, out at the marina, marina parking is controlled with a sticker. And so when you have a boat, and I don't know if they pay a fee also for the sticker, but if you have a boat, you get 1 or 2 stickers. And that way, when security comes through or the police come through, they know who's supposed to be there and who's not supposed to be there. We have a low-tech unofficial sticker at the yacht club that, you have the yacht club sticker on the back of your bumper. They know you're supposed to be parked over by the yacht club. And for that, for that method, people see everybody as a sticker. If you don't have a sticker, you think about it. But I think one of the things we'd need to do in conjunction is without a sticker, maybe we change our parking enforcement to 24 hours.
That's what I would
so
do.
people can't, if a car is unstickered, we do a 24-hour enforcement. So we're not waiting 3 days before someone has a legitimate claim to call on a car. And the police don't have 3 days after that before they can ticket it or tow it or whatever the equitable solution is. And so maybe if we started at the beginning with our existing codes, and I don't know if there's any laws that prohibit us from doing a 24-hour parking enforcement instead of a 36, a 3-day, but that might be an interim solution that wouldn't hiring a company that has a full-time employee and all the technological things into play, and could get some relief for some of the neighborhoods that have problems.
Well, it would also fix the guest pass problem. Like if somebody was just there for 24 hours or 48 hours and it was like emergency situation, like people were commenting, if that could probably handle that situation too. I think that, if we did what Councilmember Lentz suggested, and this is something that I brought up in our initial meeting, if we do it like with the certain streets that are really impacted, we'll learn a lot. And we can take those and formulate best practices and tweak the model so that when we go to the public and say, this is the parking permit proposal we have for you to vote on, we've already put it to the test. Because people might say, oh, well, I don't like this provision and that provision. But if we've already, we already know those are the provisions that work, then I think that makes sense, instead of having the voters vote on something and then us realizing it's not working and we have to tweak it afterwards. I don't think that really makes sense.
Then you might have to vote on it again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we can ramp it up. If it's not working, then I think that, maybe we ramp it up by doing something like scanning license plates or whatever. I think that if we have something that is a high cost, real people are really not going to like that. I think that if people vote against it just for that.
Also choosing the street, I think we should let the citizens of those streets choose, right? So if we think that there's a street or a section of a street that's impacted, okay, let's put out a survey. Say, hey, we're thinking of doing this pilot program. Do you want to participate? Right. And so that then we know for sure that those people on that street are interested in doing it.
And you do like a 2/3 or 3/4 of all addresses.
So and then see how that works. And then we get that feedback. And I know that you said this and others, and I understand we have a couple of members out there, and I want to thank you for the work that you've done, because what they did lay out here, I mean, they looked at all kinds of different options, and the discussion that we're having, that they had the same thing and trying to figure it out. And so thank you. But yeah, I think we have good direction to give them.
Okay. Yes.
Madam Mayor, one more thing to consider, and I know Randy, I can see the gears turning. From what you said, Councilmember Lentz, if a certain street has had a parking problem and wanted permits, they've had the ability to do that all along. All they had to do was get enough names, a petition on their street, and they could have it, which no one has. So it kind of shows the initiative, how, no matter how bad it is, people won't do it. So I think that criteria as to what constitutes a street that wants to participate, we need to figure that out. Or complete streets, maybe you can make some suggestions.
Oh, Lisa had a good comment too about putting up maybe some signage on some streets where, so yeah, this is 72 hours and maybe that, puts a seed in someone's head. Okay, maybe I
But if
shouldn't
it's
park
24 hours, it would
Oh, well,
put more on it.
but I know that, yeah, you're right. And I don't know if that's legal or not. Aren't there?
So, well, 72 hours is the basis of, we incorporated that into our municipal code based on state law, which allows you to do that. So, I mean, legal counsel could speak much better than I about, if there are pitfalls or not associated with changing that. The thing I'm trying to struggle with, and thank you so much, Councilmember Mackin, for channeling my thoughts on the parking permit program, because I've tried to do that a handful of times because we've had people come to the city engineer's office and say, God, it's really awful. And I'm like, okay, well, here's all you got to do is just, get this many people to sign, and nobody wants to do it. I think the comment we've heard throughout the night is everybody hates permits, even if they're going to be to your advantage or something about that. I think our human psyche says, no, I need to be free, leave me alone. But the couple of challenges you have, I think if you're going to pick neighborhoods, I would suggest that you pick a complete street. And the reason I would suggest that is because then it makes the signage very clear and it makes the messaging very clear to the community. It allows for the signs to be put out. And then what you would have to do, I imagine, is like most of these other permit programs do, you say, okay, this is neighborhood A, parking by permit only between these hours. And when you do that, you don't need to change the law to say it's a 72-hour rule. Because it's, if you pick between 6 and 10 or 10 or 7 or whatever the council's pleasure is, that car can't be on the public street if it doesn't have a permit. So if somebody calls it in, then whatever enforcement action the council chooses to put in the municipal code is the enforcement action that will be taken upon that vehicle without a sticker.
So it's getting late. We need to extend this meeting. I'm going to make a motion to extend this meeting to 10:50.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Lenz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
And Mayor Davis.
Aye. Okay, so I want to move this along because we still have some things that we need to get to. So I think that we're all in agreement that there have been some good suggestions here. We can kick it back to complete streets and then, dive back into this at a later date and figure out how we want to go about implementing this. Is everyone good with that? Okay. Does staff feel like they have enough direction?
We can certainly review the video also.
Yeah, I like your guys' suggestions, so thank you.
Okay. So we will now move to staff reports.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This item is an informational item, and if it's your pleasure, we can defer it to the 20th, or if you want to hear it tonight, we can do it.
Let's move it to the 20th.
Okay.
Okay. Countywide assignments and subcommittee reports. Councilmember Cunningham and I had a public advisory committee meeting. There was a comment earlier that we struggled to
Public, just so we don't get criticized for not using the correct name.
did I not say that?
Yeah.
Public art?
You left art out.
Oh, public art. Sorry, it's getting late. Sorry, I left out the word art. Anyway, actually, we worked really well together at crafting an RFP. We looked at RFPs for all sorts of cities, South San Francisco, Redwood City, Alameda, Belmont. They have all done RFPs for hiring a public art master plan consultant. So we meticulously went through all of those RFPs, and we determined which elements of those RFPs we liked. We talked about, how we would like someone to give us a timeline for how long they think it would take them to provide a master plan to us. We talked about different elements within their proposal that we wanted them to include. We had language about art on loan, temporary art, and how we wanted them to address that within the master plan. We also wanted them to detail what their public outreach would look like. And we also wanted them to focus on language around collection, ownership, maintenance of art. We want that to be all those to be sections within the public art master plan. We also talked about parts of the master plan that may be dedicated to Baylands specifically, Sierra Point specifically. So we meticulously went through many RFPs. And I thought that we did an incredible job. This is the same type of approach that we have done in all of our subcommittees. I'm pretty sure all of us have been on subcommittees in which we worked on creating an RFP that we sent out. I'm sure that Councilmember Lentz and I did that when we were looking for affordable subcommittee consultants. And a lot of times we just, kick it to staff, but with public art, we really all collectively went through RFPs and talked about how we could have the most robust RFP that would deliver us the right consultant. So that's what we did at that meeting. Do you want to add anything?
I just want to say the collaboration between all members of the Public Art Advisory Committee was excellent. And we produced a fine RFP.
So does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I do have some questions, so if you wouldn't mind. So I'm glad that you're going through that process, of course, right? So the staff person that you're working with is Noreen. So Noreen is so okay. So yeah, like with the master plan for Sierra Point, right? So Noreen is that person, helping. She helped, to go out and get those consulting firms, right? To go out and find those firms that have done work that's similar. So here we are with this process with you guys. So now the next step is to go out and get firms, and then you'll evaluate them, and then you'll make that recommendation to the full council, and then we'll have the meeting and hear what they're about and what they'd like.
Just
to
like
propose.
any other request for proposal, Cliff, there's nothing different.
Yep.
We know how to do it.
Yeah, I'm just look at, we had a member of the public that applied for the position, and he gave his best practice recommendations, which were very sound, right? And so if someone from the public puts in that work, you want to listen to them, you want to look at to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
I don't actually know what you're talking about right now.
During our committee interview.
Yeah, right. Remember, because you had said, hey, you gave a little update, Madison, and then you said, okay, I'll make sure I do it.
Here's
during
the
council
clarification
thing.
that I think
Yeah.
is needed. So we're putting out an RFP for a consultant for a master plan. We're doing it in the same approach that we've all done 100 times on subcommittees. The distinction here that was brought up was that we've also discussed hiring a curator.
Yes.
That's totally separate from the master plan.
Mhm.
We need to have the master plan in place first. That will help a curator. That gives the curator guidance, right, on how we envision art in Brisbane, where it's going to go, what our values are, all of those different things. You wouldn't hire a curator now while you're working on the master plan because there's no project, right? There's no place that we're like, this is the place we're planning for, and we're hiring a curator to help us. The curator is there to go out into the art community. They have connections. They say, these are 5 artists that we think would be excellent, and they invite them, to come in and present to us.
Mhm.
So those are 2 distinct positions. We have the master plan. We have a consultant that's going to do that. And we already have a lot of great leads on amazing firms that have done master plans for other cities that we really resonated with. And then once we have identified a place and we have a project that we want to do, for example, the mural at, or to plan for the space at the skate park, right?
Mm-mm.
At that time, then we would hire a curator who, if the committee sees fit, right? And I think part of it depends on the budget. If you have a $5,000 project, you might not do that, but you have a $100,000 project, you want to hire a curator, and then there's money in that budget that a curator would want to, apply for that position. And they would come and they would, look at the space, and they might go and they might get a muralist, they might get somebody who does sculptures, they might get somebody who does mosaics, and they would help guide that process. They would interface with the artist, and so that person is there temporarily just for when you have projects. So I think that's what I was mentioning when we were having our interviews. And I think there's still that intent. We have some new committee members, so we have to see, what their input is. But does that summarize to your understanding where we are in that process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's great, right? So I mean, it's just getting that full, understanding, so no, I appreciate that. So when do you think that you'll start to do the interviewing process?
We're going to approve the final RFP at our next meeting, and then there's going to be a few months where we have to, have the RFP out. So I would say it's a few months out before we have identified. And I think they typically are going to take like a year or so
All right.
to move through that process.
And so then for the, bringing forth, projects for the city. So I guess then that is put on hold, and then you go through so you would still do some projects.
We talked about doing some more smaller scale projects.
The smaller
something
scale.
like, with a smaller budget, where it's, small little like surprise art or sculptures.
Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the cities that we interviewed was the city of South San Francisco. They've been working on their master art plan for 10 years. It is not completed. Has it stopped them doing art projects in South City? No, there are a lot of projects in South City. And we asked them, so should we do nothing until we finished our master art plan? And the answer was absolutely not. And as they were the experts, that's the direction we went.
Okay.
I think if we had a large scale project though, something with a much bigger budget, then we would consider hiring a curator, make sure we get it right.
I think that would be smart. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we don't have very much time left. I will say very quickly on this, Clay and I had a meeting with Health Peak. I told you about that quite a few months ago. It finally happened. They really just kind of wanted to have just a casual touch base, say hi, and meet in person. They talked to us about how securing water works. So that was an interesting conversation, and they had mentioned that they had, communicated with BDI about how they're securing water. So I believe that they have a proposal in, and water is of concern to everyone. So we really didn't get into specifics or anything. They just said that that's something that they're working on right now and that they're finding it challenging. And they kind of wanted to know more information, like how does this process work, and why does Mountain View have so much more water than everybody else? So do you want to add anything about that meeting? I mean, there wasn't much.
I think you got it.
Okay, so I'll move on to Lentz and Mackin for a report on infrastructure.
Oh. Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay. Cliff and I met, we discussed facility assessments of the old library and Mission Blue, and decided before proceeding with any assessments by the architect Siegel and Strain, we asked Public Works to provide the subcommittee with an analysis of both facilities. That would be to identify any immediate repairs that need to be done to protect the buildings. And in the meantime, staff will also provide the subcommittee with a comprehensive report on rental income. So that would be covering pre-COVID and COVID years to determine whether the fees that we charge are adequately covering the upkeep for each building right now. Next meeting we have, we'll review those reports from staff and we'll decide what recommendation to bring back to the entire council. Funding has not been identified yet for any major redesigns of the facilities at this time. So that's kind of put on hold and we're more concerned with taking care of what we have and any repairs that need to be obviously done right away.
That's very clear. That's
Okay.
exactly what it was.
Okay.
Does anyone have anything else at rapid speed?
Yes.
Okay.
PCE. Key discussion last meeting was building electrification, since 30% of greenhouse gas in San Mateo County are from methane gas used in buildings. PCE has a target of 100% decarbonization in buildings and transportation by 2035. The targets are small residential, meaning homes, and small commercial buildings. Analysis shows PCE could assist in electrifying 25 to 35% of small residences by 2035. High installation costs, lack of familiarity with technology, and limited support from contractors are significant obstacles that have to be addressed. Right now, PCE is supporting building electrification with on-bill financing up to $10,000 and rebates to address the cost barrier, but the programs to offer expanded technical guidance, outreach, contractor support, and customer support will be expanding.
Great. Written communications?
City council members receive written correspondence from the following.
Okay. And oral communications number 2, anyone on Zoom wishing to speak at this time?
I see no hands, Madam Mayor.
Okay, I'm going to move to adjourn this meeting at 10:51.